Chapter 466. Later on, when he learned how to read, it was only because the Empress Dowager taught him how to use poison that he had the opportunity to learn some words. Furthermore, they were all names of herbs. Back then, when he was traveling outside, he learned how to write properly. However, because he started too late, his handwriting could at most be considered proper, without any strength of character to speak of. Therefore, whenever he thought about how he was beaten when he was young and how he was dragged to be a medicine man when he watched others practice martial arts, he hated the Empress Dowager to the core. He was a prince, not her slave, not her medicine man, and definitely not her puppet. Gong Yimo saw that his entire person was gloomy and scary, so she thought about it and said, "Don't be discouraged. You don't have to be discouraged. If they can use this as an excuse to attack your people, you can also use it to threaten them." Si Yin was gloomy. Easier said than done. Manpower is limited, and they all hide their foxtails tightly. It's harder than ascending to the heavens to find fault with them. Gong Yimo smiled carelessly. If there's a stain, we'll catch it ready-made. If there isn't, can't we create some mistakes? Si Yin suddenly sighed. You actually think the same as Shang Mingxi. It's just that manpower is limited. So many things aren't easy to do. Shang Mingxi was Yuqi's jade-faced general. He was once the Empress Dowager's favorite boy toy. He controlled the army, but in the end, he switched sides to Si Yin. This person was both good and evil. He was flexible and always had a smile on his face. At this time, Shang Mingxi was negotiating with Dai State about cooperation and trade. Gong Yimo said, "There's no rush for trade. Bring him back. It's best to leave this matter to him. Moreover, if we didn't have anyone before, but don't you have me now? I haven't met anything that I can't do. Just wait. In 3 months, these people who impeach you today will all kneel in front of you and beg for your forgiveness." Si Yin was amused by her and felt a little warm in his heart. However, he didn't know that she was serious. A reign of terror was about to begin. Gong Yimo had money in her hands, while Shang Mingxi had people in his hands. Moreover, he was sinister, cunning, and slick in dealing with people. On top of that, Gong Yimo's super-strong martial arts skills caused countless turmoil in the capital. The simplest and most brutal method was bribery. Shang Mingxi stepped forward and offered 10,000 taels of gold to bribe those greedy officials. At first, they were not tempted, but as Shang Mingxi smiled and added one gold brick after another, their eyes widened and they directly switched sides with the emperor. Then, there was the correction of mistakes. For example, there was an official who appeared to be honest in politics, but in private he booked a famous prostitute for pleasure. A group of students accidentally stumbled upon that debauchery scene, and from then on, his reputation was ruined. For example, there was a smooth and slick official who was doing well as an official. However, the treasurers under his jurisdiction were repeatedly robbed. He couldn't bear to fill the vacancy himself, so he embezzled money from other places. When Si Yin caught him, he was immediately removed from his position. Another example was the fact that the Empress Dowager had asked her maids to approve the memorials, which had aroused public anger. Si Yin stood up and wrote a confession. The people's impression of the Empress Dowager became worse and worse. The ministers had no choice but to persuade the Empress Dowager to return the state affairs to the emperor. As a result, Si Yin's position became even more honorable. All in all, in these 3 months, Jade August Imperial City was in turmoil, making the common people see quite a few jokes. At this time, the moon was dark and the wind was strong. Gong Yimo and Shang Mingxi were hiding on the boat, listening to the sounds inside. Today, they tricked the Prime Minister's only son, who supported the Empress Dowager the most. After drugging him, they sent him to the Empress Dowager's flower boat. Recently, the Empress Dowager was depressed and often played on the flower boat until late at night. That man rushed forward. Normally, the Empress Dowager would think that it was a trick, but today she drank a lot of wine. The Prime Minister's only son also had a rare good appearance, so she indulged for once. Shang Mingxi saw that Gong Yimo was watching with great interest and couldn't help sighing. This was the benefit of having a peerless expert. The most powerful person in Jade August was by the Empress Dowager's side. Gong Yimou didn't look obvious, but Shang Mingxi had observed that she should be much more powerful than the person by the Empress Dowager's side. Shang Mingxi was also a smart person. He wouldn't ask where Gong Yimou got so much money, nor would he ask how she went in alone and how she moved the treasure storeroom. He also wouldn't ask how she brought his son out under the Prime Minister's strict guard. So much so that the two of them were openly watching, but no one noticed. Her martial arts had probably reached the stage of being one with the world. In the past, even if he wanted to do these dirty tricks, one didn't have the money and the other didn't have the strength. It would take 3 to 5 months or even longer to plan something. The twists and turns in the process were even more exhausting. However, after Gong Yimou came, it was much simpler and more violent. Basically, as long as she wanted to do it, she could definitely do it. Previously, he thought that the Dayu State's emperor only sent one person to help because he looked down on them. However, later on, he found out that she alone was comparable to a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses. The flower boat swayed quietly on the waves. The other people didn't dare to make a sound, so there was only the Empress Dowager's coquettish moans and the sound of waves hitting the boat. The bright moon hung high in the sky. Gong Yimou looked for a while before remembering that there was a man beside her. She smiled embarrassedly. It's not that I want to look, but this man is too interesting. He likes to be so strange. She suddenly remembered that Shang Mingxi used to be the Empress Dowager's gigolo, so she shut her mouth to avoid making him unhappy. Unexpectedly, Shang Mingxi smiled good-naturedly. It's fine, I don't mind that much. Under the moonlight, his facial features were ordinary. If one really wanted to describe it, he could be considered delicate and pretty. However, when he smiled, it was especially eye-catching and harmless. Gong Yimou almost forgot who came up with these dirty tricks. Gong Yimou was curious. You really don't mind? Most men care about this kind of past, right? Shang Mingxi shook his head. Things were going too smoothly, so he was in the mood to talk about the past. When I was young, my hometown encountered a rare natural disaster. Many people starved to death, including my older brother. My 2 older sisters were sold. In the end, the family couldn't bear it anymore. Father stared at me and had the idea of swapping me for food. When he said this, his tone was indifferent. Sometimes, people were very strange. The pain and hatred that they thought they would never forget would slowly fade away in the end. It was so faint that they could speak of it in a normal tone without feeling anything. Mother pitied me and let me go the night before I was swapped out. I didn't dare to leave at that time because that was still my home and my heart. If I left home, where else could I go? So I hid in the haystack outside the house, hoping that Father would change his mind. His smile was still clean and innocent, but Gong Yimou could feel his coldness and mockery. Until I saw Father beat Mother violently, but he still didn't vent his anger. In the end, he dragged Mother's hair and swapped her for someone else. Only then did I give up. People who are forced to the extreme are very scary. Chapter 467. I saw with my own eyes that my mother's face was covered in blood. She was beaten until she was barely breathing. But when she saw that I hadn't left, her eyes lit up. She kept winking at me, wanted me to leave. I saw with my own eyes that she was on the verge of death. My father traded her for 3 caddies of food. I saw her neck being chopped off like an animal. Only then did I know that that place was not my home. It was not a place where I could survive. So, I'm still very grateful to the Empress Dowager. Through the gap, he could see what the Empress Dowager was doing behind the wall. He could also hear her voice. He didn't care at all. He even laughed softly. Although serving her is a very dangerous thing, it's much easier and happier to stay by her side and please her than to wander around precariously and be tortured like a slave. So, I'm very grateful to her. She also seems to like me. Male companions can't interfere in politics or monopolize power. But she gave me military power. So, it's an unparalleled honor, right? Gong Yimou was puzzled. Then why? Do you still want to rebel against her? Shang Mingxi tilted his head slightly and smiled at her, revealing 2 small canine teeth. Because I saw the future. The future? He nodded. The Empress Dowager is brave and resourceful. But because she's soft-hearted, She's close to the vile and distant from the virtuous. With her on the throne, the internal strife in Yuchi will not be eradicated. And if it continues to decay like this, once there's a disaster, the past will repeat itself. He paused, his eyes bright. I don't want to see more children like me in this world. Gong Yimo's heart trembled. He tilted his head and laughed softly. How is it? Isn't it very noble of me to speak like this? Gong Yimo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as she was about to say something, the cabin was already quiet. The ship was gradually approaching the shore. What should we do next? Gong Yimo hid in a dark corner with Shang Mingxi. Her face was full of interest. Shang Mingxi smiled faintly, as if he had everything under control. Don't worry. The Prime Minister has been waiting for a long time by the shore. Gong Yimo felt a little regretful. What a pity. She only slept for a while and didn't suffer any substantial harm. Shang Mingxi shook his head. It's not a pity, because Lu Galao is also watching in the dark. His daughter is engaged to the Prime Minister's son. Seeing this scene, Lu Galao is not the kind of person to swallow his anger. Great! Gong Yimo gave him a thumbs up. She was somewhat convinced by this man. Sure enough, Gong Yimo returned with satisfaction after watching the farce on the shore. Si Wuyin said sarcastically when he saw Gong Yimo return. Oh, you're still willing to come back? Gong Yimo was in a good mood and did not argue with him. Si Wuyin was even more annoyed and threw an invitation in front of her. Lan Si sent it. The Empress Dowager is going to hold a banquet at Hongmen. Oh, Gong Yimo looked at the post and thought of the Empress Dowager's awkward appearance at the docks. She couldn't help but chuckle. I guess it's because we're making too much noise, so she wants to knock some sense into us? Don't worry. The courtiers will never acknowledge her as the emperor. This is the bottom line. Otherwise, she wouldn't have to find puppets again and again. So she won't kill you. Si Wuyin curled his lips. How was tonight? Did she have a good time? Gong Yimo hurriedly told him all the embarrassing things about the Empress Dowager. Si Wuyin listened with a smile, but did not say anything. But his hostility dissipated a lot. After months of hard work by the three of them, excluding those neutral parties, his ability to manipulate the army was on par with that of the Empress Dowager. With such progress, it was no wonder that the Empress Dowager could not sit still and sent them an invitation. But the military power of the imperial army was not in their hands. This matter was tricky. Si Wuyin was thinking carefully about countermeasures. Gong Yimo's thoughts drifted and she thought of another matter. 3 months had passed. Gong Dai had been in contact with her through letters. Why did he not come directly? Gong Yimo thought that he had just gotten the Jade Emperor and was in high spirits, so he forgot about her. She could not help but feel wronged. But Gong Dai was wronged. He could have left for Yuchi 2 months ago. But because of the patrol, Lo Chi personally operated the new weapon. Because of improper control, he was almost killed by the explosion. Gong Dai saw the situation and forcefully used his internal energy to save Lo Chi. He did not dare to tell Gong Yimo about the external injuries caused by the explosion and the poisonous gas rising. Lo Chi also knelt for 3 days. The entire camp was in low spirits. Every day, they were trained to seek death. They could feel the anger of the prince. But this was also good. Gong Dai had more time to train the troops. One day, this would be his greatest weapon. The day of the banquet arrived as promised. In the magnificent secret dragon palace, the Empress Dowager and Si Wuyin sat in the main seats. Below them were the women of the imperial harem. Si Wuyin was very abstinent. The number of times he went to the imperial harem could be counted on one hand. Among these women, some were forced to him by the Empress Dowager, and some were sent by officials loyal to him. On the other side, Gong Yimo claimed that she was sick and did not attend the banquet. Her eyes were fixed on one person. This person was the Empress Dowager's confidant. His name was Guan Zijin. Half of the imperial army in the city was in his hands. He was the most important person. This person was the Empress Dowager's guest. Naturally, he was on the Empress Dowager's side, but he was getting older and the Empress Dowager liked young men. She had less and less contact with him. Although he did not say anything, it was impossible that he did not have resentment. Gong Yimo thought that maybe she could start from here. Then, she saw a handsome uncle sitting in the courtyard drinking tea. Gong Yimo jumped down from the wall. He stopped the guards who were about to go forward. He calmly poured tea and boiled water with a calm gaze. Princess, you should go back. I'm not like those people. I'm not greedy or lustful. I also don't have a son for you to use. Gong Yimo blinked. Then what do you want? The handsome uncle Guan Zijin sighed. Go. I will not change sides. Gong Yimo was not convinced. Why? Do you really like the Empress Dowager? Guan Zijin did not speak. Gong Yimo said fiercely, if I can promise you that as long as you help us, we will not kill her in the future. We will even let you leave and be a real couple. Are you not moved by this? You should know that as long as she is the Empress Dowager, you will not have the chance to monopolize her. Her words seemed to have moved the other party. But the other party was silent for a moment and said, go back. Gong Yimo's eyes flashed with a cold light. You should think clearly. At such a close distance, if I kill you, half of your military power may not fall into the hands of the Empress Dowager. At that time, it will be much easier for us to kill her. At this time, Guan Zijin suddenly raised his head and glanced at Gong Yimo. You underestimate her too much. Gong Yimo was stunned. He smiled deeply. During this period of time, you have repeatedly offended her. You have forced her to be full of anger. She endured it only for today. I am afraid that at this time, the little emperor's life is at stake. Gong Yimo was shocked. She suddenly raised her head and looked in the direction of the imperial palace. There was a trace of black smoke rising. Chapter 468. The Empress Dowager made a move? Why? Could it be that she had a new puppet? Gong Yimo's mind raced. Impossible. The others had all been eliminated by the Empress Dowager. Si Wuyan was the only imperial bloodline left. She looked at Guan Zijin. You must know. Guan Zijin seemed to feel that the situation was settled. He did not keep her in suspense and said directly, although the little emperor restrained himself, he had to pamper some women. Even if his medical skills were good and he took many measures, his medical skills were taught by the Empress Dowager. She could naturally see through his contraceptive methods. Moreover, the child was already born. It's a boy. As if the blow was not enough, Guan Zijin added, the child's bloodline resonates with the Si family's Long Chengyu. It's undoubtedly the Si family's blood. Gong Yimo wanted to curse. What was Si Wuyan doing? He didn't even know that he had a child for no reason. Guan Zijin laughed. You can't blame him. That woman was pregnant at that time, and the Empress Dowager let her fake her death. The little emperor never cared about the lives of the women in the harem. Why would he investigate the cause of her death? Gong Yimo's face darkened. That means the Empress Dowager wants to raise a third puppet. Guan Zijin poured her a cup of tea. It's still early. Princess, why don't you sit down and wait? When everything is settled, you can still return to your country to be a princess. Gong Yimo stared at the tea in front of her and really sat down. She frowned. Perhaps you don't understand. I'm not someone who easily admits defeat. But these things don't have much to do with you, do they? Guan Zijin thought for a moment. Whoever becomes the emperor of Yuqi will not be a threat to you. Of course, the Empress Dowager has many shortcomings in governing the country. But is Si Wuyan very good? He's impetuous, violent, and has a past like that. How many people would be convinced if he became the emperor? So he's useless? Guan Zijin stroked his beard and sneered. He really doesn't have any good points. His twisted personality is really unlikable. Gong Yimo suddenly laughed. Why don't we make a bet? Guan Zijin was somewhat guarded and did not rashly respond. Do you think Si Wuyan will die today? Guan Zijin thought for a moment. The Empress Dowager's poison skills are unparalleled. No one in the palace dares to betray her. Now that she has another trump card in her hands, she no longer has to worry about anything. Si Wuyan must die today. All right, let's make a bet. Let's see if he'll die today. Quanju Jin stopped talking again. Gong Yimo said, if Si Wuyan doesn't die today, I hope that you can lend us a hand when there's an internal strife in Royal City in the future. In return, we won't kill her in the future. We'll even give her to you so that you can be an immortal couple. Guan Zijin smiled wryly. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. Si Yin has already developed a drug that can make people forget their past. She may not necessarily not belong to you. All of this is up to you. She was making things up, but this sentence actually made Guan Zijin waver. He raised his head and looked at the smoke rising from the palace, then looked at Gong Yimo. Don't waste your energy. He'll definitely die. Gong Yimo shrugged. Do you want to bet or not? The result of the bet is God's will, isn't it? Guan Zijin suddenly asked. Why are you helping Si Yin like this? From what I know, he doesn't treat you well. If you're controlled by his poison, you can find the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager will definitely save you. Gong Yimo shook her head. I'm not poisoned. Seeing Guan Zijin's surprise, she smiled. Si Yin is indeed annoying. He's gloomy, violent, impetuous, and has limited talent. Then you? Guan Zijin didn't understand. But you can't just look at one side of a person. You have to look at the other side of him. Gong Yimo held the teacup in her hand, but didn't drink. When I was 14, he ran over to kill me. Because at that time, he thought that I was capable. Once I became someone like the Empress Dowager, Yuchi would be in danger. Gong Yimo couldn't help but laugh. But in the end, he didn't do it. He only said harsh words. Later, when he came to Yuchi, I saw that he was very irritable, but he would still read the memorial seriously. The Empress Dowager would only let a male companion do all this. He was suppressed in the imperial city, but he was still willing to help when he saw injustice. The Empress Dowager forced him to kill a defenseless woman just to show me who was the boss. He was in such a difficult situation, but he still didn't forget about the business of Yuchi. The Empress Dowager was still thinking about how to have a child, kill him, and continue to raise a puppet to be the Empress Dowager. Maybe there are many bad things about him, but this is also caused by the environment he grew up in. He never complained. Instead, he worked hard to change. In comparison, he was much better than the Empress Dowager. Gong Yimo remembered the last time she said that he had a wrong word. Whenever he had time, he would frown and secretly read the 1,000-character classic. Now that she thought about it, it was actually a little cute. I didn't participate in his past, but he was raised as a male companion and later as a puppet. It's not hard to guess what he went through. He's the worst emperor I've ever seen, but he didn't have parents and stumbled until now. He still has his nature. I'm willing to help him. Guan Zijin was silent for a long time. He had watched Si Yin grow up. The child was forced to develop a beast-like character only because the Empress Dowager felt that it was boring for everyone else to follow her, so she did it on a whim. Now that he thought about it, it was cruel. She wasn't like this before. She and I were childhood sweethearts. Stop. Gong Yimo finished her tea. I'm not interested in your past. I only want to ask you, do you want to bet with me? If you win, she will be the Empress Dowager. If you lose, I'll make her your childhood sweetheart again. Guan Zijin felt that it was a foregone conclusion. There was no way to turn the tables. In the end, greed took the upper hand. He had guarded her for more than 10 years. Why couldn't he have her? So he actually nodded. Very good. Gong Yimo didn't say anything else. She jumped over the wall and rushed into the palace. Then, she met Shang Mingxi, who was equally anxious. Her eyes lit up as she leaped onto his horse and whipped its butt. Shang Mingxi was shocked by her actions. Before he could say anything, Gong Yimo asked, Last time, you said that the Empress Dowager liked you and made an exception to give you military power? Shang Mingxi nodded. At this moment, his face was solemn. He still didn't know what was happening in the palace. Gong Yimo smiled strangely. If you go and kill Lan Si, what do you think the result will be? Shang Mingxi was stunned. Even if she wanted to divert attention, she didn't have to do this, right? Go and beg the Empress Dowager for mercy. Beg her to accept you again, then take the opportunity to kill Lan Si. You might not die if you do this, but if you don't attract more attention, Si Yin will definitely die. Do it or not. Just say it. Shang Mingxi sighed. Do it. Most people wouldn't be able to accept begging to be a boy toy, but Shang Mingxi could. It wasn't that difficult to get on someone's good side by kneeling and saying a few words. Chapter 469. The palace was under martial law. Shang Mingxi loudly requested an audience with the Empress Dowager. The people below could not make up their minds. Shang Mingxi smiled at the person who was in a difficult position. Just inform the Empress Dowager that I, Shang Mingxi, request an audience. The person was bewitched by Shang Mingxi's smile. He nodded and flew away. This was the Empress Dowager's world now. Who knew if the Empress Dowager still had feelings for this person? As for Gong Yimo, she followed the noise and barged into a house. She used her qinggong to enter the palace. Although she was almost discovered several times, she managed to enter without any mishap. The entire dragon hall was burning. What was terrifying was that no one went to put out the fire. Instead, the hidden dragon hall was surrounded by thousands of soldiers, as though they were preventing anyone from entering to save people. The fires slowly grew bigger. They were all waiting for someone to save them, for the entire hall to collapse to ensure Si Wuyan's death. The Empress Dowager hid in a dark corner and played with the porcelain bottle in her hand as she spoke to Lan Si. Do you think this princess is so powerful? If she really comes to save people, I'll take advantage of the chaos to attach this goo worm to her. Will she be of use to me in the future? Lan Si smiled. Just as she was about to speak, someone came to report that Shang Mingxi requested an audience and relayed Shang Mingxi's words. At that moment, Lan Si saw the smile on the Empress Dowager's face turn cold. Just as she was about to say something to break the atmosphere, the Empress Dowager raised her hand and said, "Raise the sedan." Lan Si's expression changed drastically. She was leaving because of Shang Mingxi's words? Empress Dowager, Gong Yimo will be here soon. You can't leave. The Empress Dowager glanced at the burning hall. Boring. Si Wuyan must have died long ago. So what if she comes? Besides, I have so many subordinates here. Can't I stop a woman? With that said, she waved her feather fan and signaled for the sedan to rise. Lan Si was unwilling. But don't you still want her to be of use to you? That goo worm, she's the princess of Daiyu State after all. It won't do Yuchi any good to make things too tense. Dong Luani's expression changed as she spoke indifferently. Empress Dowager. Lan Si was so anxious that her tone became heavier. However, Dong Luani's cold gaze landed on him, startling him. Only then did he realize how overboard his actions were. You don't seem to be able to see where you are. Dong Luani sat on the small bamboo palanquin and pulled back her clothes from his hands, mocking him. What Aijia gives to you is yours. If Aijia doesn't give to you, you can't stretch your legs. Let's go. Lan Si felt lost. She looked at her hands and the Empress Dowager's back. In the end, she gritted her teeth and chased after her. He had worked so hard for so long to get to where he was now. Could it be that once that traitor returned, he would have to give up his position? It didn't make sense. As the wind blew, the fire grew even stronger. The Imperial guards guarding the Hidden Dragon Palace were sweating profusely from the heat. Just when they thought that Gong Yimo wouldn't come, she came. Gong Yimo appeared at the entrance of the Hidden Dragon Palace. Everyone was on high alert and raised their weapons. However, her eyes were cold as she strode over. She looked so calm. Everyone hesitated. Wasn't she worried? When she got closer, they realized that she was holding a child in her hands. Those people weren't stupid. It went without saying who the only child in the palace was. They didn't expect the princess of Daiyu State to be so cunning. She actually went to steal the child first. Didn't they say that the child was under strict protection? How could it be in her hands? They were on guard and wanted to ask the Empress Dowager for instructions. However, the Empress Dowager wasn't here. Gong Yimo had already lifted the child up. I want to go in. If you don't let me, I'll throw this child to his death. When she said this, there was a cold smile on her lips. Her tone was cold and powerful. It seemed like she would definitely do what she said. She herself was a bloodthirsty demon. The Empress Dowager was also ruthless. The entire Hidden Dragon Palace was surrounded by 1,000 people. Even if she had the confidence to kill them, Si Wuyan's bones would probably be burned to ashes. Therefore, she predicted this situation before entering the palace and took the risk. The leader of the Imperial Guards signaled someone to ask for instructions from the Empress Dowager. Gong Yimo didn't stop him. However, the child in her hands felt the heat and started to cry. You can ask for instructions, but I don't have that much patience. Let me go in." They were still blocking her and trying to stall for time. "Princess, please wait. Without the Empress Dowager's orders, we won't let him go." Although Si Wuyin was stabbed and poisoned, he couldn't be sure that he was dead. Therefore, the leader of the Imperial Guards wanted to stall for time until Si Wuyin was dead. However, that child, he was the only child of the Si family. He couldn't die. He had to try his best to protect him. Seeing that this person was stalling and that the fire was burning fiercely, Gong Yimo was anxious and lifted the child up high. "Since you don't care about the child's life, there's no point in keeping him. If he falls to his death here, I'll go back and still be the princess of Daiyu State. I won't lose anything. I just don't know what will happen to Yuchi. I'm really looking forward to it." She laughed sinisterly and pretended to throw the child. The viciousness in her eyes didn't seem to be a lie. The leader of the Imperial Guards was finally scared out of his wits. "Wait!" he hurriedly shouted. He didn't expect that Gong Yimo, who was also a woman, would be so merciless to a child. The child was still crying, but the murderous intent in her eyes was almost tangible. The leader of the Imperial Guards hesitated. He couldn't let the child go, but he had to. "Get out of the way." The heat wave hit, and her eyes turned red from the fire. The leader was forced by Gong Yimo's aura. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead, but he still refused to let go. "Princess Gustate, why do you have to do this? Do you want the two countries to go to war?" Gong Yimo was getting more and more anxious. She wanted to hack this person to death. "Go to war? You're right. A divided country is perfect for my Daiyu State to swallow up. I guarantee that it won't take much effort. This child should just die." She raised her hand again, and her words sounded like a warning bell to the leader. That's right. Maybe she did it on purpose to create an opportunity for the Daiyu State to invade. With this thought, the leader hurriedly shouted, "Wait! Get out of the way! All of you, get out of the way!" The leader of the Imperial Guards panicked and ordered with his forehead full of sweat. Everyone hurriedly made way. He licked his lips and stared at the child in her hands. "Princess, we've already listened to you. You should give the child to me." He spoke cautiously because at this time, Gong Yimo was too scary. Her black hair was blown by the heat waves, and her eyes were red. When she glanced at someone, her murderous aura surged. Even though they were by the fire, they felt a chill run down their spines. They didn't dare to provoke her again. "Get out of the way," she scolded, and the leader of the Imperial Guards actually took a step back subconsciously. Gong Yimo looked at the burning palace in front of her and the black mass of Imperial Guards. Her heart was filled with hostility. Chapter 470. These people were the Imperial Army. Was this how they protected their emperor? Gong Yimo sneered. "I'll throw the child out after I go in. Try saying no if you dare." She glanced at him with a cold expression. The Imperial Army leader wanted to say something, but he couldn't. He stepped back in fear and watched Gong Yimo stride in. It wasn't that Gong Yimo couldn't force them to go in and look for Si Wuyin, but she knew that if these people went in, Si Wuyin wouldn't have any way to survive. Once they found Si Wuyin, they would kill him and claim that he was long dead. Dead men tell no tales. So she could only come in and look for him herself. Wasn't it just a sea of fire? There was nothing to be afraid of. She passed through layers of guards and got closer to the flames. Before she stepped into the sea of fire, she was stopped by a pair of crossed spears. The Imperial Army leader didn't dare to approach and only spoke from afar. "Princess, hand over the child. We'll let you go in." Gong Yimo smiled. She didn't want to be entangled, so she really threw the child out. At this moment, everyone's eyes followed the small figure that was thrown out. Finally, someone with excellent Qinggong carefully caught the child. When they turned back, Gong Yimo had already disappeared into the sea of fire. She really went in. Dong Wani raised Shang Mingxi's face with a strange expression. "Do you really want to return to Aijia's side?" Her tone was teasing. Shang Mingxi raised his head and smiled. This smile was just like when he was by her side, gentle and clean. It was obviously an ordinary face, but when he smiled, it seemed to glow. It was hard to dislike him. Dong Wani's face suddenly darkened. She stood up straight and looked down at him with a cold smile. The little emperor is dead. You don't have anyone to rely on, so you want to come back? Shang Mingxi, when you were by Aijia's side, you were always like this. I didn't expect you to still be like this. Shang Mingxi knelt up straight. A good bird breaks a tree to perch. I'm just judging the situation. The Empress Dowager snorted, and her eyes were cold. What a good judge of the situation. You abandoned your old master without a word and got together with your new master. Now that your new master is dead, you want to return to your old master's side. What a straightforward person. What a cruel heart. Shang Mingxi smiled, but didn't say anything. It was as if he wasn't the one being insulted. Well, this bit of humiliation was nothing to him. His lukewarm attitude greatly provoked Dong Luani. She couldn't help but say angrily, "When did I ever let you down? You want to betray me? Don't you find it ironic that you're back now?" Shang Mingxi looked at her furrowed brows and smiled faintly. He asked seriously, "Can I return to your side after being scolded by you?" Being stared at like this, Dong Luani, who was in her 30s, blushed. It was hard to tell whether she was angry or angry. Lan Xi saw that the situation was not good and quickly stepped forward. "Shang Mingxi, do you know what it means to be shameless?" He felt that the situation was out of control. The Empress Dowager obviously still had feelings for this man. Shang Mingxi remained calm in the face of Lan Xi's humiliation. "Are you afraid that you won't be able to keep your position when I come back?" "You." Lan Xi was infuriated. She stepped forward and lifted Shang Mingxi up by his collar. "You want to come back, right? But do you think a traitor like you can come back just because you say so? It seems that I have to teach you the rules." He glanced at the Empress Dowager's eyes and found that she had acquiesced. It was obvious that the Empress Dowager also felt that she couldn't let Shang Mingxi off so easily. "You should be taken away and taught a good lesson." She snorted coldly. Lan Xi became even more excited. She dragged Shang Mingxi by his collar and was about to walk out. But when she turned around, Shang Mingxi suddenly pulled out the gorgeous sword at Lan Xi's waist and stabbed it into his chest. Dong Luani's cry of surprise rang in his ears. The two men faced each other, one with the same expression and the other with eyes full of fear. Shang Mingxi actually dared to kill him? Before he could think too much, Shang Mingxi suddenly moved closer and spoke in a somewhat seductive voice. "I'm back. As a substitute, it's time for you to retire." As he spoke, he pushed Lan Xi to the ground with his sword, leaving behind a panicked crowd. Even Dong Luani didn't expect Shang Mingxi to kill Lan Xi. "Shang Mingxi, are you crazy? Who allowed you to commit murder?" The Empress Dowager roared. A middle-aged man appeared beside her like a ghost. He was the Empress Dowager's protector and was sometimes sent out to carry out other tasks. Shang Mingxi's right hand was covered in blood. Just now, he had stabbed it so deeply that it had directly pierced through Lan Xi. His clean robe and white, jade-like fingertips were stained with blood. He took out a handkerchief to wipe his clean left hand, but his eyes were smiling as he looked at the frightened Dong Luani. "If I don't kill him, there's no place beside you that I want." His words stunned Dong Luani. Indeed, she doted on Lan Xi the most because Lan Xi was gentle and attentive. Her personality was very similar to Shang Mingxi's. It wasn't wrong to say that he was a substitute, but what Shang Mingxi meant was that Lan Xi had taken his place. So he used such a method to get rid of the obstacle. His audacity should be very repulsive, but because he was the one who did it, Dong Luani couldn't feel a trace of anger. She was even surprised. This was Shang Mingxi, the man she liked. Even though she was 10 years older than him, no one would dislike Shang Mingxi after interacting with him. He was gentle and attentive, used to being submissive and smooth in dealing with people. However, he was truly ruthless and heartless, which made him even more fascinating. "What do you want?" Dong Luani was used to being domineering. Even though her tone was fierce, what she said was asking for his opinion. Shang Mingxi smiled. Against the light, he was bathed in a halo by the sunlight. No one dared to look directly at him. The Hidden Dragon Palace was the Empress Dowager's residence. Now that it had been burned down, they were now in another palace. The little prince was also here. Shang Mingxi only found out the reason the Empress Dowager had taken action when he arrived here. It was because His Majesty had a child. When Shang Mingxi stepped forward, Dong Wani retreated. However, she didn't speak, so the people protecting her didn't move either. They allowed Shang Mingxi to grab her hand. Let's go. Let's go see the child. Dong Wani wanted to withdraw her hand in fear, but Shang Mingxi, who was close by, showed a strong aggressiveness. This was a completely different change from usual. Dong Wani actually forgot to resist. Before Dong Wani could understand what he meant, Shang Mingxi whispered into her ear. After seeing the child, I'll also let you see me, okay? This was a naked invitation. Under Shang Mingxi's smiling gaze, this woman, who was famous for being ruthless and heartless, actually felt shy and allowed him to pull her away. Chapter 471. Fire and Black Smoke. The fire was released from the outside. It was obvious that the Empress Dowager wanted to kill Si Wuyan directly, but what did he do to make the Empress Dowager give up on killing him and start a fire from the outside? Gong Emo arrived at the banquet hall and hurriedly glanced around. She found a lot of dead people in the hall, including his and the Empress Dowager's people. There were also a few bottles and jars on the ground. She understood that Si Wuyan must have spilled the poison at the critical moment. Since no one could get close to him, the Empress Dowager decided to burn him to death. However, her gaze swept past them, especially the burnt corpse that had stopped for a few seconds. These people were not him. He might still be alive, but the surrounding flames and poisonous smoke were everywhere. Even if he was still alive, where could he be? She was too careless. Gong Yimo anxiously looked around and scolded herself. Her previous plots had gone too smoothly, so she did not expect the Empress Dowager to have such a trick up her sleeve. This was really a Hongmin banquet. Her eyes were filled with fire. She was in a daze for a moment. It was too similar. In her previous life, she broke into the Yuqi Imperial Palace and set fire everywhere. He was waiting for her in the Hidden Dragon Palace. Was he waiting for her as well? Based on her memory, she found the Empress Dowager's bedroom. This was the place where Si Wuyan committed suicide in her previous life. The floor was covered with pearls, agate, and jade, but he was not there. He was not here either. Gong Emo rushed to the courtyard again. Her clothes were burned, and she cut them off with her backhand. Looking around, the entire courtyard was covered in black smoke. It was broad daylight, but she felt like she was in hell. The sky was dark red, and there was no light. She could not tell the direction. The later she found Si Wuyan, the more likely he was to die. Gong Yimo was burning with anxiety. Just as she was about to rush into the opposite fire building, she suddenly saw a large water tank in the corner. Unknowingly, she walked over. There were flames all around her. She could walk in them, but Si Wuyan could not. If he was really in the water, this water tank was very big, and there was moss at the bottom of the tank. Obviously, it had not been moved for a long time. Gong Yimo walked closer step by step. She was a little nervous. If Si Wuyan wasn't here, she really didn't know where to find him alive. Finally, she saw layers of scattered black hair floating on the water. Si Wuyan. She quickly reached out and wanted to pull him out, but when he heard the sound, he moved first. He slowly raised his head and gradually emerged from the water. First, it was his hair, then his pale neck, and his black and red robes. That pair of beautiful and narrow eyes were usually magnificent and charming, but now they were a little empty. He stared at Gong Yimo without blinking, as if he didn't know her. Water droplets kept rolling down his face, making him look like a newborn fairy in the water. Gong Yimo finally heaved a sigh of relief. Great, she had found him. Because in the courtyard, although the disgust was strong, it was not enough to kill because it was spacious. However, the surrounding buildings were burning fiercely, and the situation was getting worse. Gong Yimo could still stumble her way in just now, but it would be hard to say if the fire continued. Moreover, the weather was too dry. If the trees and flowers around them were burned, they wouldn't be able to escape even if they wanted to. She had to hurry. Gong Yimo wanted to pull him out of the water and think of a way to escape. Aren't you curious? he suddenly asked. Gong Yimo was in a hurry, so she didn't have the mood to care about what he was talking about. He continued to speak. Aren't you curious why I wasn't killed directly? Gong Yimo was racking her brains to think of a way to escape. It was not practical to fly out with a person, but it was also very dangerous to go out through a completely burning building. She had just rushed here and was very careful. Her clothes were also burned. So what should she do? Seeing that Gong Yimo didn't answer him, Si Yin was a bit dissatisfied. You still haven't answered me. Gong Yimo turned around and was a bit impatient. But because he stood up, she found that the water in the vat was bright red. He was injured. She turned Si Yin around and found that there was a deep wound on his back. If he hadn't applied medicine in time, it would have been more serious. But he had nowhere to hide, so he hid in the water vat. The medicine dissolved in the water, and the wound started to bleed again. Gong Yimo made a prompt decision. She tore off her inner skirt and sprinkled the medicine on it before tying it around his waist. Everything could wait until they got out. Just as she was doing this, Si Yin suddenly chuckled with his back facing her. It's no use. There's poison on the knife. My medicine can only suppress the poison temporarily. Maybe this second or the next second, I'll die. Gong Yimo thought, no wonder the Empress Dowager didn't directly kill him. So she thought that he would definitely die after being poisoned? As if reading her thoughts, Si Yin continued, why wouldn't she want to kill me? At that time, I sprinkled all the poison on me, and no one could get close to me. That woman didn't want to be entangled with me. So she took the people who didn't die and left, then set the fire. Gong Yimo tied a knot on the cloth and said in a low voice, we'll talk about it when we get out. You're so smart. You'll definitely be able to concoct the antidote before you die. Si Yin shook his head. It's too late. He could feel his limbs turning cold and stiff. He didn't have any medicine in his hands. Soon, even if he didn't die in the fire, he would die from the poison. In a moment of desperation, Gong Yimo didn't care so much. She took out all the medicine from her space. These medicine were all tributes. Could it be that not a single one of them was useless? Si Yin seemed to be deeply poisoned. Seeing her take out so many things, he only tilted his head and didn't say a word. Then he picked up one of the bottles. The unique smell of the recover pill assaulted his senses. Not knowing why, he didn't move for a long time. Previously, I was cut by a knife and almost died. But I crawled into her room and used the remaining medicine to concoct some antidote. At that time, the poison and medicine mixed together, it was very painful. I was thinking if someone saved me at this time, I would confer him a high official and enjoy the glory, splendor, wealth, and rank. Unfortunately, there wasn't any. No one came to save him. Gong Yimo was originally anxious, but seeing his face getting paler and paler, and his eyes dim, it was obvious that he had already decided to die. It seemed that these medicine were secondary. He gave up on it. Was there really no hope? Gong Yimo didn't talk nonsense. She frowned and quickly stuffed the medicine back into her clothes. Just as she was about to say something, he continued. Later on, there was a raging fire outside, and I was trapped inside. Actually, I went out once. But when I held the door and walked out, what awaited me was a long spear. Si Yin parted his black hair. Gong Yimo saw that there was a bloody hole on his shoulder. Because he was wearing black and red clothes, the wound wasn't obvious. But it was obvious that the other party had deliberately wanted to kill him. The stab was very deep. Gong Yimo's eyes darkened. Like earlier, she quickly applied medicine on his shoulder. She could imagine that he had gone through a near-death experience to appear at the door, only to be met with a knife. Chapter 472. I don't understand. His lips gradually turned purple, and his face was full of confusion. I'm the Emperor. I've never killed anyone. I've worked very hard. Why do they treat me like this? That woman was laughing from afar. When she saw that I was in a mess and wanted to run out, she laughed and asked them to force me back into the fire. Those people listened and really didn't allow me to take a step out. They teased me like a beast and showed them my final struggle. He paused, and his voice started to become hoarse. At that time, I shouted, Whoever saves me, I'll agree to anything you want. I'm the emperor, I'll do what I say. But they looked at me and sneered. They didn't care about me, and still, no one saved me. Someone shouted, "This is the consequence of a male gigolo being disobedient." But I'm not a male gigolo, I'm a prince. No, I'm the emperor. Just because of my past, they can look down on me without restraint. Does it feel good to rape an emperor? Especially when they were right. I've been a male gigolo. His gaze gradually became unfocused, and his expression became quiet, as if he was reminiscing about the past. When I first became the emperor, I wanted to achieve great things. But she wanted to prove to the world that she was the one who had the final say in Yuchi. So she once forced me to kneel down and lick her feet in front of everyone. Some officials were arranged to watch in the dark. In the end, they couldn't help but laugh. Then I found them. They were so ashamed that they wanted to die. They looked at me with disdain, and no one felt that they should help me up or speak up for me. They looked down on me and refused to accept me. I've been eating liquid food and vegetables for a long time. In order to maintain my skin's texture, I couldn't eat many things. But one day I ate meat. She smiled and put in my bowl. It was a person's finger. So it was a little palace maid who pitied me and gave me a piece of meat. She beat her to death. She said, "Since you love to eat meat, you have to finish all these. If you don't finish them, you'll have to eat meat like this every day." I ate and vomited while she laughed. Gong Yimo bandaged the wound on his shoulder, but no one knew how heavy her heart was when she heard him say all these. He didn't tell her all these before he died in her previous life. Finally, the grass and trees in the courtyard started to burn. If this continued, they would really die here. "We can get out. You have to believe me." Gong Yimo solemnly tore off a piece of cloth and wet it before covering his mouth and nose. However, he gently avoided it. At this moment, Gong Yimo could also see that his body was beginning to stiffen. It was obvious that he did not have long to live. He suddenly looked at Gong Yimo, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his lips. And Gong Yimo was gently grabbed by his hand, but she couldn't bear to break free. She suppressed her anxiety and looked up at him, only to see that his expression was calm and fearless. Some people said that when a person was about to die, their eyes would be cloudy. However, his eyes were very clear as a newborn baby's. I didn't want them to watch me die at the door, so I retreated back here. There's fire everywhere. So hot, so suffocating. I'm about to be burned to death. You won't die. You still have me. Gong Yimo calmed down and forced herself to think of a way to get people out of this wide firewall. He couldn't die. When I jumped into the water tank, I was still thinking. If someone came to save me now, his body swayed and his head fell on a Gong Yimo's shoulder. If someone came to save me, I'll grant her death. Gong Yimo, die with me. Gong Yimo was stunned, but there was a dagger pressing against her heart, hard and hard, pressing against her body. It was clearly a very overbearing thing. But why did she only feel bitter at this moment? Because he was already in despair and was about to die. No one could save him, so he hated anyone who came late to save him. If one wanted to save a person but couldn't appear in time and didn't save the soul, would that count as saving? The road to the underworld is too cold, so cold. "Can you walk with me?" he whispered in her ear. His voice was inaudible, but the dagger in his hand was slowly moving in. As long as he stabbed it, he would be able to kill Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo didn't move. She felt a sharp pain in her chest and also felt that he was hesitating. At this moment, she didn't say a word and didn't move, as if she was at his mercy. The fire grew stronger and stronger, almost engulfing the small courtyard. The sky was shrouded in black smoke, as if the night was devouring souls. Beside him was a blazing fire, as if karmic fire was burning him, and the person beside him was the only one who came to save him in hell. Even if she came late, even if he was about to die, so what? She came to save him. The dagger fell into the water tank. One of them stood outside while the other stood inside the tank, gently leaning against each other. Separated by the boundary of fire and water, it was as if life and death were competing. "I still can't kill you." He smiled. Just like 4 years ago, you had the talent to look down on the world. You made me afraid, but you didn't have the ambition to dominate the world. Si Wuyin seemed to have regained some energy. He said to Gong Yimo, "You should go. This fire will hurt you, but it won't kill you. If you bring me along, you'll definitely die." He looked at the tragic scene in front of him and suddenly smiled. "I'm satisfied that you can see me before you die." Gong Yimo suddenly took out the medicine from her chest again. "You said that if someone comes to save you for the third time, you'll drag him down with you. But now you won't kill me. Do you want to change the ending?" "What?" He looked up. Blood was flowing out from the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were still clear. Gong Yimo tiptoed and smiled at him. "If someone comes to save you again, you'll have to serve that person as your master." Si Wuyin was stunned. "So, your life is mine. Now, I order you to prolong your life. At least let me bring you out of here alive." The air was filled with a burnt smell, but the fragrance on her body was very sweet. It made Si Wuyin feel like a pool of stagnant water that was suddenly injected with a little vitality. Gong Yimo poured out all the medicine in her hand into her palm. She knew that Si Wuyin knew what medicine these were. "I want you to prolong your life," she ordered, her eyes sharp. Si Wuyin was obviously very domineering, but he did not feel angry at all. She held a dozen different pills in front of him with both hands. However, in his eyes, they were vitality, hope, and faith. His world was like this sea of fire. It was dark, distorted, and broken. However, as long as she was here, all these did not seem to exist. He finally slowly picked up a pill and swallowed it. With her around, the darkness didn't exist. Gong Yimo saw that he ate 3 pills and stopped. She wanted to ask him about the situation, but the moment the medicine entered his stomach, his whole body trembled and blood flowed out from his 7 orifices. Gong Yimo was shocked. She quickly hugged him before he fainted. Seeing that his heart was still beating, she heaved a sigh of relief. She looked up at the sky. This was great. How was she going to bring an unconscious person out of this sea of fire? Chapter 473. One side was burning the sky, the other was warm and fragrant. Shang Mingxi lay on the couch with Dong Wani in his arms. Beside him was the child who had been kept in the dark. He was blinking his dark eyes and blowing bubbles ignorantly. Dong Wani hugged him coquettishly. She had long forgotten about Lan Si's death. Right now, she only had eyes for this man, the only man she had ever liked. "You want to raise him and then raise a puppet?" Shang Mingxi's voice was gentle and soft, without a hint of reluctance. It was as if the dead emperor was already a thing of the past, and he changed his attitude without a trace of unwillingness. Dong Wani was about to answer when someone came to report in a panic. "Not good. Empress Dowager. That's Princess Gu. That's Princess Gu." Dong Wani hurriedly got up from the couch and shouted when she saw a person kneeling on the ground in fear. "Princess Gu has barged in." Dong Wani was stunned and subconsciously glanced at Shang Mingxi. Seeing that he had no reaction, she shouted, "What are you panicking for? Si Wuyin is dead for sure. The knife that cut him was smeared with Aijia's newly made poison. Normal people will die at the sight of blood. Even if he has a special constitution, he won't be able to last long. By the time Gong Yimo enters, he will already be dead." She didn't know if she was saying this for the servants or the people around her. It was as if she was telling Shang Mingxi that Si Wuyin was already dead and the only person he could rely on was her. So in her panic, she forgot to ask how the other party entered. Shang Mingxi heard this but smiled without saying anything. He patted her back lightly. "Don't be anxious." Dong Wani was a bit embarrassed, and the person reporting to her widened his eyes. The words he wanted to say were stuck in his throat. No wonder the person was so surprised to see Shang Mingxi. He forgot to say that Gong Yimo found a fake prince to fool the imperial guards. The prince was with them, and the child that Gong Yimo brought was a fake. Dong Wani frowned. "All right, no need to say any more. Prepare the carriage. Aijia wants to see what's going on." It would be a lie to say that she wasn't worried. After all, they were killing the emperor. Therefore, she was no longer in the mood to continue being affectionate with Shang Mingxi. She hurriedly got up to take a look. Shang Mingxi wanted to go with them, but Dong Wani was afraid that Si Wuyin was really still alive and had been rescued by Gong Yimo. If that was the case, Shang Mingxi would definitely be up to something again. So she said to Shang Mingxi, "You stay." Seeing her like this, Shang Mingxi nodded. However, he glanced at the person on the ground who was peeping at him with some dissatisfaction. "I can stay, but the way these people look at me makes me angry." He didn't sound like he was angry, but Dong Wani understood that he was in an awkward situation. Lan Si was dead, and Si Wuyin's people who had betrayed her appeared here again. It was inevitable that people would look down on her, so she couldn't help but say loudly, "Your status is only second to mine. If anyone displeases you, just kill them." Her words were like an imperial edict, so who dared to disobey? Shang Mingxi gently tidied up her skirt. "Let Hai Qing go with you. Gong Yimo is very skilled in martial arts. We have to be careful." Hai Qing was the #1 expert in Yuqi. Dong Wani's heart skipped a beat. She felt that Shang Mingxi was genuinely concerned about her, so she nodded subconsciously. "You should rest." With that, she hurried out. The group of people made their way to the secret dragon palace. She wanted to see what kind of tricks a person who was bound to die could play. Gong Yimo really felt like she was looking around, but there was nowhere to run. The flames soared into the sky. She couldn't climb over while carrying people. If she tried to climb over, she wouldn't have a foothold and would be injured. She carried Si Wuyin out of the water tank. Even if the medicine was of the highest quality, if they didn't get out in time, Si Wuyin would still die. Then, everything she had done during this period would be in vain. Yuqi would be out of her expectations. At this moment, the 4 sides had been burned into one. There was no opening left. If she wanted to get out, she had to create a hole herself. At this critical moment, she gritted her teeth and took out a bow from her space. Then, she tied a pin to the front of the arrow and aimed it at a spot in the sea of fire. Whether she succeeded or died, it all depended on this move. With a loud bang, sparks exploded. The Imperial Guard stationed outside looked up and saw the palace behind them exploding into countless sparks that covered the sky. Before they could figure out what had happened, Gong Yimo gathered her inner strength in her hand and shot an arrow that was further away. Bang! Another thunderous boom rang out, and it was as if the earth itself was shaking. At this moment, they looked down and found that it wasn't just seemed, it was really shaking. The entire burning palace was on the verge of collapse. "It's going to collapse," someone shouted, and everyone quickly moved out of the way. As soon as they moved out of the way, the front half of the palace collapsed. Sparks flew everywhere, and the ground was filled with debris. The leader of the Imperial Guards held the child and regretted. If he had known, he wouldn't have let the princess in. If she died in there, what should he do? The fire was still burning, but the Empress Dowager's sedan chair had arrived. She quickly asked when she arrived, "What's going on? What was that sound?" When the leader of the Imperial Guards heard that the Empress Dowager had arrived, he was afraid that she would punish him, so he quickly went forward to claim credit. "Empress Dowager, the sound just now was because the palace collapsed. The princess, I'm afraid she died in there. But it's okay. The little prince is still here. He's not injured." "The prince?" Dong Wani was puzzled. The leader thought, could it be that the person who sent the message was too anxious and forgot to mention it? Therefore, he quickly handed the child in his arms over and said with a fawning expression, "The prince is here." Dong Wani was stunned and then sneered. She didn't expect Gong Emo to be prepared for this. She even found a child to pretend to be a prince. It was only natural that these people would be deceived, allowing Gong Emo to enter without much effort. At this moment, she didn't have the time to scold this person for having a pig brain. She just looked up and stared at the burning palace. The front and middle halls had collapsed, but the back halls weren't. They were still burning like firewalls, and the heat distorted the air. She couldn't see what was happening inside, but she felt that Gong Yimo must be dead. It was good that she was dead. She was the one who asked for it. What could the Dayu state say? Although she thought so, there must be a lot of trouble. She angrily glared at the uneasy leader of the Imperial Guards and coldly stared at the child in his arms. Empress Dowager, if it wasn't to ensure the little prince's safety, I definitely wouldn't have let anyone in. Please forgive me. He still wanted to defend himself. Dong Wani was so angry that she laughed. Since you're so loyal, go to hell. Before that person could understand what she meant, his head was chopped off. Hai Qing quickly caught the child in her arms and ignored the leader who had rolled to the side. The child was splashed with blood and cried loudly. It was very annoying. This idiot is holding a bastard child as a treasure. Why aren't you killing him? It's annoying just looking at him. Yes. Hai Qing obeyed and was about to kill the child in her arms when she heard a weak female voice from afar. Empress Dowager, aren't you afraid of retribution for killing innocent people? Chapter 474. Hearing this voice, everyone felt as if they had seen a ghost. Could it be that the princess was still alive? This was impossible. She was not dead. The Empress Dowager and the others could not be bothered with the child. They quickly looked towards the source of the voice, only to see a raging fire. There was no one there. Was that voice just now an illusion? Although the palace had collapsed, there was still a bonfire as tall as a person paving the way. Black smoke rose and waves of fire rolled. If Gong Emo was alone, she wouldn't be able to cross such a long distance with her lightness skill. Without a foothold, she could only force herself to walk on fire. However, if she did that, her feet would be crippled. If Si Wuyin was still alive, it would be even more difficult for her to carry her. Therefore, the Empress Dowager did not believe that even if Gong Yimo was still alive, Si Wuyin could not possibly be alive. Gong Yimo did not have to bring a corpse out. However, even though she thought this, she still felt uneasy. Is she still alive? Dong Wani was a little scared and asked Hai Qing in a trembling voice. Hai Qing's martial arts skills were excellent. The female voice just now was transmitted using internal energy. It was so real that he was not sure if Gong Yimo was still alive. However, he soon found out, because they saw a figure stepping on the fire. Si Wuyin had already fainted. The medicine that Gong Yimo took out was too strong, and the medicine was not suitable for the illness. Although it had a suppressive effect, his weak body could not withstand the impact of the two medicines. His signs of life were slowly disappearing. The raging fire burned. He could clearly feel the burning pain on his skin and flesh. He felt very tired, but also very relaxed. He had misspoken. He could not save his own life, not even for a moment. He even felt that his body was getting lighter and lighter, as if he was about to leave his body. However, how could Gong Yimo watch him die? The house collapsed and black smoke rose into the sky. Si Wuyin finally felt that his breathing was smooth. Following that, a warm current flowed into his body from his back, warming his limbs that were twisted from the pain. His vitality was immediately pulled back. Moreover, the two forces were tugging at each other. It felt like half of him was in the wind and half was in purgatory. And Gong Yimo was the one pulling him back in purgatory. She wouldn't allow him to leave. Death was easy, relaxing, and comfortable. However, the person who was pulling at him didn't let go. He was also in great pain. But in such a dangerous moment, surrounded by raging flames, she actually didn't think of escaping. Instead, seeing that he was about to die, she didn't hesitate to use her inner strength to prolong his life. This kindness made Si Wuyin unwilling to die. Even if it was heaven when he closed his eyes and his body and mind were light, he would open his eyes and live on in hell. His body suddenly trembled. More blood flowed out of his nose and mouth, but he opened his eyes. There was still black smoke, flames, and her in front of him. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. However, she was now in a very sorry state. There were many wounds on her body, all of which were left behind by the explosion. Her clothes were almost destroyed, but Si Wuyin's clothes were still intact, because Gong Yimo had protected him during the explosion. You shouldn't. Save him. Without him, it would be much easier for her to get out. Gong Yimo carried him up. The consumption of her inner strength made her weak, but carrying a person wasn't a problem. feeling that she was still using her inner strength to prolong his life. Si Yin clearly knew that she shouldn't, but he still felt a lump in his throat. "Why are you so good to me?" His voice was almost inaudible. However, Gong Yimo heard him. She looked at the sea of flames and said calmly, "Because someone told me that he wanted to be a good emperor, that he wanted to benefit Yuchi. He wanted to prove that his existence wasn't a disgrace to the Si family, but an honor." This was what Si Yin told her in her previous life. Gong Yimo still remembered that when he said this, his tone was serious and regretful. At this moment, Si Yin was listening. In his days, he actually thought that he said it himself because that was what he thought and worked hard to achieve. Gong Yimo looked at him and said in a low voice, "Since you want it, I'll give you this chance. Live on, or you'll have nothing." Her calm words were like a shot to the heart, making Si Yin's heartbeat gradually clear. He looked up and saw a hellish scene. His hand grabbed onto her sleeve and gradually tightened, but he didn't feel afraid at all. Live on. In order to prove himself, in order to resist, for her, Gong Yimo had tried it before. The space was like her body. As long as she touched something, it would be stored in the space. Similarly, she could take things out from any part of her body, such as water. She directly moved the water tank into the space and used her mind to adjust the water under her feet. Then, she carried Si Yin and jumped into the fire. Before she landed, her gaze focused. She forcefully used her inner strength to create a small vacuum. When she landed, the water splashed and turned into white smoke. Her feet were uncontrollably burned, but she gritted her teeth and endured it, because in the next second, the fire would engulf her again. Originally, the wind could only temporarily suppress the fire. The water could extinguish the fire in a small area, but couldn't control the fire from all sides. Therefore, she endured the pain and jumped up again before the fire surrounded her. Before she landed, she used her inner strength to drive the fire away. Then, she adjusted the water under her feet to reduce the burn and fight for a moment to breathe. Then, she heard the Empress Dowager's cruel words. This idiot, she actually held the bastard as a treasure and didn't deal with him. Looking at him is annoying. Gong Yimo's mouth curved into a cold smile. Although she didn't have much inner strength left, she still had to say it. "Empress Dowager, aren't you afraid of retribution for killing the innocent? Protect the Empress." The moment Gong Yimo's figure appeared, Haixing only had one thought. This was the only word in Haiqing's mind. Even though the other party looked like she was riddled with wounds, even though she was just a little girl, he still felt a chill run down his spine, especially when he saw that person walk out of the fire. Step by step, she seemed to be very calm. Dong Wani was so scared that she couldn't speak. She still remembered how Gong Yimo jumped out of the fire and how she landed safely. Although they had only seen it once, they were deeply impressed. This was the natural respect for the strong. She finally came out. Although the last part of the road was flat, with only a few dozen centimeters of fire paving the way, Gong Yimo didn't have much inner strength left. It wasn't enough to support her inner strength, so she could only use water to pave the way. Outsiders couldn't see the trick. They only felt that she stepped out of the fire. The flames around her made a chi-chi sound, and clouds of white smoke rose. They didn't know how Gong Yimo did it, why the fire disappeared on its own, and what the white smoke was. They were only shocked. Finally, they were surprised to find that she was holding a person. She actually saved Si Yin. Seeing the light again, Si Yin squinted at the sky and then looked at her. Chapter 475. Covered in smoke and fire, she was in a sorry state, like she had been rolling around in the black ash. Her clothes were filled with large and small holes, and the burn marks were very clear. There were even burn marks on her skin and between her brows. There was a bit of exhaustion. However, her eyes were incomparably bright as she looked into the distance. This was a power that no one could shake. No matter how difficult it was, no matter how bad the situation was, she dared to charge through mountains of blades and seas of fire. Si Yin couldn't help thinking about how she had jumped into the flames. The water vapor had risen, and the surrounding flames were only an inch away from them. They had truly walked through the flames and sought survival in the flames. Whenever there was a spark, she would protect herself first. There was a second when he saw the spark burn a circle around her body. He felt like there was a hole in his heart that was both painful and hot. He was very clear that Gong Yimo protecting him was the habit of the strong to protect the weak, but there was an unstoppable impulse that was born in him. That was, he didn't want to be weak anymore. Being weak wasn't an excuse. Why couldn't he be strong enough to protect her? The Imperial Guard's mouths were all wide open. It was clear that this scene had shocked them all. They watched as Gong Yimo created smoke with every step she took as she slowly walked through the last path made of flint. They watched as the flames behind her burned the sky, and the surging heat made people drip with sweat. Finally, Gong Yimo stepped on a clean ground, and the last wall of fire behind her collapsed at that moment. Everyone moved back in fear. Was it the collapse of the wall of fire that scared them, or was it Gong Yimo's appearance that scared them? Was it because she was too frightening that every movement around her could cause them to become frightened birds? Gong Yimo bent down and placed Si Wuyin on the ground. Her face was covered in black ash, and her body was covered in sweat. When she lowered her head, there was a white mark on her face that made her look very sorry. Si Wuyin was also not much better. His body was covered in burn marks, and even with her protection, the heat was not something a normal person could withstand. He fell asleep again, but his breathing was still stable. Gong Yimo looked into the darkness before raising her head to speak to the terrified Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager, I think we can make a deal between us. Baichio regained his senses after being glanced at by Gong Yimo. Not only him, even the monkey beside him had a shocked expression. The scene of Gong Yimo walking out of the fire just now was still lingering in his mind. That tragic figure in the raging flames was actually better than countless white robes fluttering in the snow, countless luxurious gowns. It was also the first time he deeply understood that Gong Yimo and he were not people of the same world. The distance between them was not shorter than the distance between them and the sea of fire. Seeing that he was dejected, the little monkey scratched him, indicating that it was time for him to get down to business. It turned out that after Gong Yimo entered the palace, she had specially looked for him to do something. Shang Mingxi's nature was obvious. If there were no benefits, he would definitely protect himself first. Therefore, if Si Wuyin died, Shang Mingxi would definitely not say anything. Even if he was still alive, he would probably hesitate and consider the situation. The Empress Dowager would definitely consider that Shang Mingxi was not dead and would not let Shang Mingxi follow her. Baichio's task was very simple. He wrote a letter and sent the little monkey to inform Shang Mingxi that his master was not dead. There was a risk in doing this. Now on the Empress Dowager's side, Shang Mingxi was above everyone else, and Si Wuyin was dying and still waiting for him to save him. What he would choose would depend on what Baichio said. To be more precise, it would depend on what Gong Yimo said. This task was both simple and complicated. However, Gong Yimo could not leave now, so he became the key. Only when he was writing the letter, he once again sighed in his heart. He and Gong Yimo were not the same kind of people. She was a woman who dared to go through mountains of swords and seas of fire. Not only was she brave, but her strategy was also unmatched. Most of the time, she was simple-minded. However, when she was serious, her brain was not known how it developed. She would think 100 steps before taking one step. For example, she would snatch the child in advance and inform him in advance. She would predict Shang Mingxi's character in advance and consider whether he would hesitate. She even thought of what to say to persuade Shang Mingxi. He was just relaying it. Baichio still remembered Gong Yimo laughing and saying that if Si Wuyin died, he did not need to write the letter because Shang Mingxi would not come. She was so sure. Dong Wani used to think that all the women in the world, except for her, were useless. She had everything she wanted since she was young. Whatever she wanted to do, she only needed to give an order and others would do it for her. Later, she became the Empress and the Empress Dowager. Her ambition grew, not to mention women. She even felt that no man could be on par with her. However, she met Gong Yimo, a girl who was half her age but was unstoppable. She would be her biggest obstacle. Sensing the extreme danger, Dong Wani's eyes gradually sharpened. Now, it was obvious that Gong Yimo's strength had decreased greatly. She was no match for Hai Qing. Therefore, if she killed Gong Yimo now, no one could stop her. Only by killing this big trouble could she be at ease. However, at this moment, Gong Yimo suddenly asked her if she wanted to make a deal. Dong Wani thought about it again and felt that it was best to kill her. After all, this person gave her too much of a threat. Princess, if you want to make a deal, you should talk to the King of Hell. Her eyes were full of murderous intent, which made Gong Yimo laugh. If you kill me, you won't be able to escape death. Cough, cough. Do you still want to make a move? Dong Wani's face darkened. She sat high up in the carriage, but felt uneasy. Don't be an alarmist. Would the Emperor of Daiyu State really start a war for you? Gong Yimo said, start a war for me. Maybe not. But Yuqi is an internal strife now. Previously, the Daiyu State did not interfere with your internal affairs out of benevolence and morality. However, if you kill me, you will give the Daiyu State an excuse to start a war. The consequences will be unpredictable. After all, human nature is greedy. Dong Wani had never felt so troubled and aggrieved. So you came to Yuqi to help my enemy, but I can't do anything to you? Gong Yimo smiled, revealing her white teeth on her disheveled face. Theoretically, you're right. Yes, Gong Yimo was fearless. She came to Yuqi alone. So what if the world knew that she came to help Si Wuyan? A person's power was limited. If she killed her in the name of fear, others would only laugh at Yuqi for being paranoid, or that she did it on purpose. But no one knew Gong Yimo's ability. She could fight against 10,000 soldiers alone. Dong Wani couldn't say anything. If that's the case, then tell me, what kind of deal do you want to make? Dong Wani had been the Empress Dowager for a long time. She quickly suppressed her anger and calmly decided to listen to Gong Yimo first. Chapter 476. Seeing that she had relented, Gong Yimo relaxed her tense back and smiled calmly. The Empress Dowager must not like me, right? How about this? As long as the Empress Dowager allows Si Wuyan to leave Yuhua City alive, I will return to Daiyu State and no longer interfere with Yuqi's matters. How about that? Dong Wani did not speak. Let Si Wuyan go. Although she was confident in her poison and believed that Si Wuyan would not survive, she was still hesitant about letting him go. She knew about Si Wuyan's talent. If he did not die this time and made a comeback, even with the child in her hands, she would not be able to hold her ground. If those who supported her saw that Si Wuyan was not dead, they would definitely not allow her to raise another puppet. They were worried that she would become too powerful and eventually lose control of the country. However, Gong Yimo's conditions were also very tempting. Without her orders, even if more than half of the people switched sides to Si Wuyan, what could they do? Now that Shang Mingxi had returned, he also had the military power in his hands. In this way, Si Wuyan had less than 50,000 soldiers, while she had 250,000. It was not enough to be a threat. However, if Shang Mingxi knew that Si Wuyan was not dead, would he switch sides again? Dong Wani was deeply conflicted and was in a difficult position. On the other side, Shang Mingxi looked at the mischievous monkey in front of him and held the note with a smile. On the note was a sentence. His Majesty has been rescued. The situation is critical. Please come and save him. However, he did not move. It had to be said that Gong Yimo had guessed correctly. Shang Mingxi was starting to have his own considerations. He knew very well that with the Empress Dowager's temperament, even if His Majesty was rescued, he would still be in a state of uncertainty. Moreover, Gong Yimo herself had said that the situation was critical. It was not wise for him to get involved in this mess. If the emperor was not going to make it, he could still do well with the Empress Dowager. However, if he appeared now, it was uncertain whether the emperor would survive or not. He would definitely be standing on the opposite side of the Empress Dowager. If it was in the past, he would not hesitate. However, His Majesty now had a child. Shang Mingxi looked at the crying child not far away, and a trace of gentleness flashed across his eyes. As long as he had a child, even if he was by the Empress Dowager's side, he could make the child look like what he wanted. As long as he was willing, this child would be 1,000 times more perfect than his father. Moreover, there would be no stain. When he grew up, and the Empress Dowager was old, he could inherit the throne without making a big fuss. Everything was logical. Why should he give up what was near and seek what was far away? Seeing that he had not moved for a long time, the little monkey scratched his head and took out a note from the pocket of his vest. There's more? Shang Mingxi raised his eyebrows and opened it. Do you want to be the Dark Emperor? But I don't agree with you being the Dark Emperor. Yuqi will fall behind the other 3 nations. Was this a threat? Shang Mingxi didn't have to guess to know that this was Gong Yimo's tone. If His Majesty died, the Empress Dowager would support a puppet dictatorship. But the Empress Dowager didn't like to deal with political affairs, so these things would eventually fall into his hands. The title of Dark King was not wrong, but why didn't they agree with him? What he wanted to do would only be better than what His Majesty was doing now. The little monkey was baffled by his stare and took out another piece of paper. There were only 4 words on it: bad character. Shang Mingxi couldn't help laughing when he saw this. Gong Yimo really understood him. What Yuqi urgently needed now was someone who could abandon himself for the country. He was better than Si Wuyin, more mature, and more rational. But he couldn't sacrifice himself for the country, but Si Wuyin could. The little monkey took out the last piece of paper. You once said that you didn't want Yuqi to have more children like you. I promise you this wish in the name of the princess. The smile on Shang Mingxi's face disappeared, and his eyes became cold. After a long time, the little monkey was frightened by his appearance and shrank its neck. But he patted its head and revealed a smile that made its hair stand on end. Dong Wani was thinking about Gong Yimo's words, and Gong Yimo was also arguing with her. At this moment, Bai Chio walked out from the shadows and stunned everyone present. They didn't expect someone to be hiding here. Gong Yimo gestured for him to carry Si Wuyin. The 2 exchanged glances, and she knew that Bai Chio had done it. Next, it was up to Shang Mingxi to decide. Empress Dowager, you have to make a decision quickly. If you continue to hesitate, the contents of the deal won't be like this. Dong Wani finally made up her mind. Gong Yimo, Aijia admits that you are very smart and know how to control people's hearts. But Aijia thinks that letting the tiger return to the mountain is no different from digging your own grave. Her eyes suddenly flashed with a venomous light. Say, Si Wuyin loved you before he died and wanted to drag you down with him. What do you think of this ending? It's still very much like his style, isn't it? Gong Yimo smirked. You mean that even if it means starting a war with Daiyu State, you will still kill him and me? Dong Wani smiled. Yes, you will all die here. Then, she raised her eyebrows. What are you waiting for? Kill them. The Empress Dowager's order stunned the thousands of imperial guards present. They feared Gong Yimo from the bottom of their hearts, but now that she was so weak, she didn't seem difficult to deal with. Gong Yimo looked calm on the surface, but she was secretly anxious. Dong Wani sneered. Don't wait anymore. This time you will all die. That may not be true. A gentle male voice sounded. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. But Dong Wani turned around as if she had seen a ghost and stared at Shang Mingxi. But this wasn't the scariest thing. The scariest thing was that he was carrying a child. A large group of palace servants followed behind him, but they didn't dare to get close to him. They could only watch as he carried the child closer. Every step seemed to be stepping on Dong Wani's heart. Shang Mingxi must have threatened them, so they didn't dare to use force. But she trusted him so much. Why did she value him so much? Shang Mingxi. She suddenly jumped off the carriage and shouted his name with a twisted expression. Shang Mingxi. Shang Mingxi smiled at her. Empress Dowager Jin, please don't get too close. Otherwise, this child's life will be at stake. Hai Qing quickly stopped the Empress Dowager and said in a low voice, Please calm down. Calm down. Her eyes were instantly bloodshot, as if she had been ruthlessly slapped in the face, or as if someone had forcefully stabbed her with a knife. She continued to stare at Shang Mingxi. How could she calm down? How could she calm down? Why did you betray Ijia? Haven't Ijia given you enough? You should know that what Ijia can give you, Si Yin can't give you in his lifetime. Shang Mingxi stroked the child's head and avoided her gaze as he sighed softly. There are some things that she can give you, but you can't. This she was referring to Gong Yimo. Chapter 477. He was very clear that Gong Yimo had far more resources than he imagined. Moreover, the connections, business opportunities, and peace that she possessed were what Yu Qi desperately needed right now. As long as she kept her promise and supported Yu Qi could quickly recover. But before that, Yu Qi had to settle down, and there could only be one person in charge. I'm going to kill you. Dong Wani pulled out Hai Qing's sword and slashed at Shang Mingxi, but Shang Mingxi nimbly dodged it. He wasn't a man without the strength to truss a chicken, but he usually didn't make a move. He looked gentle, but his movements were quick. He quickly hid behind Gong Emo. Since he had already been pulled onto the pirate's ship, this kind of thankless task will be left to Gong Emo to deal with. So before Dong Wani could slash at him again, Gong Emo's hand covered the child's head, and Dong Wani was instantly pulled back by Hai Qing. Empress Dowager, do you want to be taken hostage by her? Hai Qing warned her in a low voice. Dong Wani gripped the sword so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She wanted to hack Shang Mingxi to death. No, she wanted to kill everyone here. Kill them all. Empress Dowager, if you want to be the Empress, I'm afraid it's not that easy. This child is a disaster to us, but to you, he's your only trump card, so I'm not afraid of him dying. Why don't you try taking another step forward? Gong Emo's threat was like a bucket of cold water poured over the Empress Dowager's head. The Empress Dowager was stunned, and the viciousness in Gong Emo's eyes forced her to regain her rationality. But after a moment, she said fiercely, "Fine, you can take Si Yin and the child away, as long as you leave Shang Mingxi behind. Ijia will let you leave." Gong Emo raised her brows slightly and turned to look at Shang Mingxi. He blinked and said sadly, "Princess, this official's life is in your hands." Gong Emo couldn't help but laugh and said to the Empress Dowager, "All of us have to leave. As long as you let us out of the palace, I'll naturally return this child to you." Dong Wani sneered. Her entire body was twisted and sinister. "Then you can all die here." Gong Emo refused to back down and confronted him head-on. "If I die, then so be it. If I die, you won't have an easy time either. Without this child, let's see if you can still comfortably be the Empress Dowager." Dong Wani was impulsive and was about to issue a kill order. However, many people around her stopped her and asked her to reconsider. Countless voices of persuasion rang in her ears. Even she herself knew that the child could not die. However, Dong Wani's eyes were glued to Shang Mingxi, filled with deep resentment. Gong Emo also noticed this and said slowly, "Some people are more fun to torture when they're alive. What's the point of dying? Don't you agree?" She was persuading the Empress Dowager. As long as there's life, there's hope. If she let them go now, she could still catch Shang Mingxi another day. However, the premise was that her position as the Empress Dowager was stable. Gong Yimo looked at Si Yin by Chio's arms. "Moreover, if Si Yin really dies, I can't stay in Yuchi. At that time, you'll have the puppet in your hands. Won't you have the final say in what you do?" "Princess." Shang Mingxi was speechless. She shouldn't trick her own people like this. Dong Wani gradually calmed down. She didn't believe that other than that reclusive divine doctor, who could save Si Yin. She wanted to let Shang Mingxi know how ridiculous his decision was. Her reddened eyes finally moved from Shang Mingxi to Gong Yimo. She asked in a low voice, gritting her teeth, "As long as you leave the palace, you'll hand over the child? Si Yin must die, but this child must not die." Gong Yimo looked at her seriously. "I don't have any other virtues, but I'm famous for doing what I say." "Good." Both of them looked at each other and saw the determination and fierceness in each other's eyes. They could hide for a while, but they couldn't hide forever. She wanted to see where they could escape to after handing over the child. "Leave?" She felt hateful when she saw them. Gong Yimo smiled and really left. However, when she moved, her body staggered. Shang Mingxi couldn't help but look at her feet. He found that her feet were severely burned. It wasn't hard to imagine what had happened before. Can you still walk? Bai Chio asked with concern. I'm fine. Gong Yimo took a deep breath. Let's go. As they spoke, they retreated and walked out of the palace. The little monkey quickly ran over and jumped onto Gong Yimo's shoulder. Shang Mingxi looked at this group of people. Some were unconscious, some were seriously injured, and there was even a strange monkey. They were completely a motley crew. He wondered if he had made a wrong decision. On the way out of the palace, the Imperial guards on both sides were on standby. They stared at them covetously, but they didn't make a move. Gong Yimo asked Shang Mingxi in a low voice, "How many people do you have?" At this critical moment, he didn't keep them in suspense. 3,000 people. They're already waiting at the palace gate. But he wanted to say something, but stopped. 3,000 people were too few. If the Empress Dowager ordered all the Imperial guards to move, they could only run for their lives. Moreover, if the Empress Dowager ordered Guan Zijian to intercept them first, they would have no way to survive. Therefore, the child in their hands was the key. Don't worry. I'm 50% sure that Guan Zijian will let the child go, Gong Yimo said very seriously as she held the child. Shang Mingxi believed her words. When he thought about it, he felt that it was inconceivable. After they left the palace, Hai Qing questioned them from behind. Hand over the prince. Gong Yimo said, First, hand over the child that I brought into the palace. Hai Qing was stunned. He didn't expect her to still remember this. However, one child was not enough, so he handed it over to Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo handed it over to Shang Mingxi's men. Seeing him send the child away, they heaved a sigh of relief. Are you going to hand over the prince now? Hai Qing pressed on. Gong Yimo laughed shamelessly. I'll definitely hand him over. However, I won't hand him over to you. I'll hand him over to Guan Zijian. He must be waiting for me at the city gate, right? Hai Qing was furious. You dare to lie to me? Gong Yimo looked up at the palace gate. I said that I'll return him to you after we leave the palace. As long as I'm still in Yuhua City, doesn't that count as leaving the palace? I advise you not to come forward. Otherwise, I'll strangle him to death right now. Gong Yimo was holding the child. Although she was smiling, her hand was still on the child's neck. Hai Qing was a little hesitant. Moreover, Shang Mingxi's men were surrounding them, so he couldn't do anything. Forget it, there was still Guan Zijian. The Empress Dowager was also gathering her men. They wouldn't be able to leave Yuhua City. Seeing that Hai Qing was no longer bothering them, Gong Yimo and the others quickly got on their horses and led the 3,000 people out of the city. Once the Empress Dowager caught up, they would definitely be overwhelmed in numbers. That was no joke. However, there was still one more obstacle to pass through the city gate. Chapter 478. Gong Yimo sat on the horse, looking disheveled. Guan Zijian found it strange. He hadn't seen her for a few hours, but she looked seriously injured. Uncle Guan, does our agreement still stand? Si Wuyin isn't dead. You promised to let us go. Guan Zijian looked at her and then behind her. The Empress Dowager is gathering her men and will be here soon. There are only 3,000 of you. You can't run away even if you want to. How do you know if you don't try? Gong Yimo held the child in her hands. As long as you open the city gates and let us go, I'll give you this child with both hands. Guan Zijian wanted to go back on his words. I can't go against her wishes, and I believe that you won't kill this child. He saw that the child was sleeping soundly. It was clear that Gong Yimo didn't have any murderous intent towards him. Those people were too worried and didn't notice. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. She knew that this man was difficult to deal with, but she wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Do you know why the Empress Dowager was so angry? Isn't it because you saved His Majesty? No. Gong Yimo's dark little face revealed a smirk. She pointed at Shang Mingxi. It's because of him. I asked him to trick the Empress Dowager. As expected, the Empress Dowager still has feelings for him. She killed Lan Si and accepted him again. Otherwise, How do you think I managed to steal this child under heavy guard? Gong Yimo's words made Guan Zijian's face darken. He glanced at Shang Mingxi with murderous intent in his eyes. He knew Shang Mingxi. He didn't expect that after 4 years, the Empress Dowager still hadn't forgotten him. Shang Mingxi smiled bitterly. He was really being used by Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo heard the commotion behind her and was a bit anxious. There's no time. I'll give you one more chance. The agreement this morning still stands. Let's go. If the Empress Dowager asks you, say it's for the safety of the prince. Otherwise, when Shang Mingxi returns to the Empress Dowager's side, she won't even look at you. As she spoke, she raised the child with both hands. If you agree, come and take him. Princess. Shang Mingxi didn't believe this old fellow and was afraid that he would go back on his word. However, Guan Zijian made a decision in an instant. He actually walked towards Gong Yimo. Originally, the Empress Dowager's order was to kill them rather than let them go. However, as a member of the Yu Qi family, it was reasonable for him to protect the bloodline of the Si family, wasn't it? Gong Yimo gave the child to him without hesitation. Even Cageman Jean himself was a little hesitant when he held the child. Princess, do you mean what you say? He was talking about the agreement between the two of them. Gong Yimo looked at his struggling face and reassured him, Don't worry, I'll do what I say. Hearing her reply, Guan Zijian looked at her sitting on the back of the horse. Even though she was in a sorry state, she was still in high spirits. In the end, Guan Zijian could not overcome his selfish desires. Open the city gates. Gong Yimo's eyes lit up, and she cupped her fists at him. Please take good care of this child. Goodbye. Guan Zijian's expression was solemn as he said in a low voice, The Empress Dowager has 30,000 Imperial Guards, and I have 20,000. If she knows that you've escaped, she will definitely send out all her troops. Take care of yourself. Gong Yimo nodded and rode away. She already had a suitable place in mind. Snow City. Snow City was Si Wuyan's power and was not far from Yuhua City. The entire army could reach in a day if they rode fast. Moreover, Snow City's city walls were famous for being sturdy. To prevent attacks from the beasts in the day forest, the city walls were high and smooth, making it easy to defend and difficult to attack. Gong Yimo led the army and ran quickly. The Empress Dowager was not someone to be trifled with. She sent a few thousand cavalrymen to chase after them first. Gong Yimo led the army to fight and wasted a lot of time. However, she was always able to win despite being outnumbered. Every time, she would be able to slip away under the Empress Dowager's nose. The Empress Dowager was furious. Shang Mingxi's expression was indescribable. He realized that Gong Yimo had an amazing talent for military affairs. It was not an exaggeration to say that she could command troops like a god. Every time, she would almost subconsciously make a decision based on the terrain. Furthermore, every decision she made was correct. This made Shang Mingxi gasp in amazement. His kind of talent could not be innate, right? How did he know that Gong Yimo had been fighting for 10 years in her previous life? However, they could not go on like this. They had to kill their way to Snow City before the army caught up. Finally, after a sleepless night, they arrived at Snow City at noon the next day. The entire city was under martial law. Gong Yimo did not have time to rest. After she settled Si Wuyan down, she asked Bai Chio to stay behind to take care of him. She took Shang Mingxi to the city gate to set up the defense. The Empress Dowager had 30,000 Imperial Guards. Jin Shou had 20,000 Imperial Guards. Normally, people would leave 20,000 Imperial Guards to guard their homes. However, if the Empress Dowager saw that they had escaped, she would definitely go crazy and send out all her troops. There were 5,000 Imperial Guards stationed in Snow City. Together with the 3,000 Imperial Guards that they brought back, it was a battle between 8,000 Imperial Guards and 50,000 Imperial Guards. The result was obvious. Even a calm person like Shang Mingxi was a little anxious at this time. However, he saw that Gong Yimo was very calm. She only washed her face and changed her clothes. She did not even have time to treat the wounds on her body. She was already wearing a suit of armor that did not fit her well and stood on the city wall. Seeing her was like seeing their backbone. Although they did not want to admit it, it was the truth. 8,000 Imperial Guards against 50,000 Imperial Guards. How do you want to fight this battle? It was noon. However, according to the Empress Dowager's speed, they would arrive soon. Perhaps in 2 hours, perhaps in 1 hour. I need your crossbows with the longest shooting range. I also need 10 of the most accurate archers. In addition, you need to prepare basic items such as boiling water, hobs, and trebuchets. There is no time to dig the trenches. However, you need to put a barrel of boiling oil on each of the 4 observation towers at the city gate. Listening to Gong Yimo's endless arrangements, Shang Mingxi did not dare to delay and gave out orders one by one. The people in the city were very frightened. Was the Empress Dowager really going to fight with the Emperor? The governor of Snow City was one of Si Wuyan's men. He had arranged for the best doctors to treat Si Wuyan's wounds. All of them said that the poison had reached his heart, and there was no way to save him. He asked someone to tell this to Shang Mingxi. Shang Mingxi hesitated for a moment and told Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo just nodded. Her expression did not change. Shang Mingxi said, "Aren't you anxious? If His Majesty is dead, all your efforts will be in vain." Gong Yimo frowned. "If I do nothing now, he will definitely die. If I do something, he will still have a chance to live, right? You're putting the cart before the horse." Shang Mingxi was speechless. Just as he was about to say something, the ground trembled slightly. The Empress Dowager was here. The autumn day was dry. They could see smoke and dust coming from afar. It was not a small formation. Moreover, there were more than 50,000 people. Shang Mingxi was a little anxious, but Gong Yimo just narrowed her eyes and said in a low voice, "Get ready. Prepare for battle." Chapter 479. The enemy came closer and closer. Finally, the army stopped 500 meters away. Someone rode his horse forward and stopped 100 meters away. He must be here to deliver the Empress Dowager's message. It was Hai Qing. His voice was loud as a bell as he laughed. "Princess of Daiyu State, you've really found yourself a good place to defend. However, it's only 60,000 against 8,000. You have no chance of winning." Shang Mingxi whispered in a Gong Yimo's ear. To be able to gather 10,000 people in such a short time, they must be the private soldiers of the aristocratic families. Based on the number of people, they must have turned out in full force. It seems like those people all believe that the Empress Dowager can win. Gong Yimo pursed her lips and smiled. A dim light flashed in her eyes. "You mean, if these people all die here, the aristocratic families will hate the Empress Dowager to the core? After all, it took a lot of effort to train the aristocratic family's private soldiers. They were a huge asset." That was true. Shang Mingxi glanced at Gong Yimo. However, he had to have the ability to make them stay. Unfortunately, Shang Mingxi did not think that they could win. The disparity was too great. Oh, perhaps there would be a miracle? He looked at Gong Yimo's side profile. She was determined, calm, and without a trace of fear. Seeing that Gong Yimo did not answer, Hai Qing said again, "The Empress Dowager is benevolent. If you surrender and hand over Shang Mingxi, the Empress Dowager will guarantee that you can leave Yuqi safely." Shang Mingxi immediately became nervous. "Princess, I believe that you can win." Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. Don't think that she did not know that Shang Mingxi had always doubted her combat ability. Now that she was going to force him out, he was trying to please her. "Don't worry, my position is not as uncertain as someone else's." Shang Mingxi rubbed his nose gloomily. "Please go back and tell the Empress Dowager." Gong Yimo finally spoke. Hai Qing looked up and saw that she was wearing a green armor. Under the autumn sun, her armor shone with a cold light. Just like herself, she was like an unsheathed sword. She had a natural affinity with the battlefield. She laughed out loud and said something that no one understood. "Please tell her that if she wants to fight, then fight. On the battlefield, Gong Yimo, have never lost." Hai Qing was still unwilling to give up. At this point, they were not afraid that Gong Yimo would be troublesome if she died. Instead, they felt that Gong Yimo was too difficult to deal with. It would be best if they did not have to face her. Princess, you've got to think this through. Once we start fighting, we'll fight to the death. You're wrong. She smiled. You're the ones who will definitely die. Arrogant. Hai Qing was so angry that he reined in his horse. He didn't want to argue anymore. He turned around and went back. His movement was like a signal. The Empress Dowager waved her fan and said coldly, "Attack." When the Empress Dowager moved, Shang Mingxi was a little nervous. He clenched his fists and didn't know if he should trust a little girl. She was only 18 years old. How could she know how to fight? The speed of the army's advance was very fast. The flying dust covered the sky and covered the sun. The withered grass was trampled by them. The enemies who were full of fighting spirit all raised their heads, thinking that this was a one-sided battle without any suspense. Very soon, 400 meters, 300 meters, they did not hesitate to charge. Princess, they're coming. Shang Mingxi didn't know what her previous arrangements meant, but now he was really anxious. Wait a little longer. Gong Yimo stared at the enemy and accurately calculated their speed. Her expression was cold. 150 meters. Shoot, she ordered. The archers behind her shot at the two observation towers at the front, one on the left and the other on the right. The arrows pierced deeply into the wooden barrels. They were aiming at the angles set by Gong Yimo. Then, oil leaked out and flowed down the long bamboo slips. The people who were charging at the front saw the oil flowing down on both sides and were a little confused. But next second, Gong Yimo had already raised a lit fire arrow and casually shot it. In an instant, the grass was set on fire. The fire was not big, but because it happened so suddenly, many people stopped and did not move forward. And those who had already rushed and found that the fire was deliberately controlled. There were gaps in the grass, so that the fire could not spread in the direction of Snow City. It seemed that the fire was just to keep some people away. A fire line about 10 meters wide was burning. Outside the fire line were the hesitant army, and inside the fire line were more than 3,000 enemies. They estimated that after the grass was burned and the fire was reduced, the reinforcements behind them would rush over. So they were not afraid and continued to charge forward after being stunned for a while. Gong Yimo smiled and said, "Open the city gates, garrison troops attack. Kill these 3,000 people first." Shang Mingxi was a little speechless. Did the princess think that a shallow fire line could stop the army? Once the fire was reduced, or the enemy endured the burns and charged over, they would be digging their own graves. They won't be able to kill us. Gong Yimo looked at him impatiently. You shouldn't have questioned my decision. When she said this, her voice suddenly became cold. At that moment, Shang Mingxi suddenly felt that she was a general, and a great general who had been on the battlefield for many years. That kind of majesty made him forget to question her. He braced himself and gave the order. But when the city gates were opened, the garrison troops did not charge out. Although they had 8,000 people, the enemy had 60,000 people. What could a fire line do? Weren't they courting death if they went out? Gong Yimo did not speak, but the Empress Dowager laughed loudly. I thought she had some ability. Could a fire line stop Aijia? With that said, her expression turned serious. Give the order, all troops attack. Isn't it just some kerosene and grass? Can it burn them to death? It would be troublesome if the kerosene stuck to their bodies. After all, they were not wearing full armor, but chain armor. What if the kerosene got on their clothes? But Hai Qing thought that since they had so many people, they would be able to extinguish the fire. So what if they got on the kerosene? They had so many people, and the enemy had opened the city gates. They just had to end the battle quickly. So Hai Qing gave the order, kill them. The people below obeyed and stepped on the fire line. The kerosene did indeed get on their clothes, but very few people pounced on it. They saw that the enemy had opened the city gates and were like fat sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Those people did not even dare to charge out. What was there to be afraid of? So everyone was in high fighting spirit and charged toward the enemy. Now was the time. Gong Yimo raised her bow and instilled inner strength into it. The arrow was tied to a needle and shot in the direction of the fire line. Before everyone could understand what was happening, they heard a loud sound. Dozens of people were overturned in an instant. The fire on the ground cracked and fell on the enemy soldiers like rain. It was so hot that they cried out in pain. Once again, they stopped in their tracks. They looked over in horror. Smoke filled the air and sparks flew everywhere, but they did not know what was happening. The Empress Dowager, who was watching the battle from afar, suddenly had a bad feeling. What was the origin of that sound just now? Why did Ijia feel that the ground was shaking? Chapter 480. Hai Qing was also shocked. He looked into the distance and said after a while, I can't see clearly. It looks like it's an arrow. How can an arrow be so powerful? Hai Qing, you're talking nonsense. Although the Empress Dowager said so, she and the officials who followed her here could not help but wonder if this was the weapon in the hands of the Princess of Daiyu State, the weapon that even the Emperor coveted. This was not the end. Gong Yimo directly fired 2 arrows, and the oil barrels that were still leaking oil exploded in the air. Sparks of oil splattered everywhere, and everywhere it went. It was like a fairy scattering flowers. The flowers did not look obvious, but they were sparks. When they covered the sky and landed on the body, they were very destructive. Especially when they landed on the hair and skin, it was very disturbing. The enemy panicked. Some people put out the fire on their bodies. Some held onto their injured limbs and wailed. Some hurriedly retreated and stepped on the oil and cried out. There were also some who blindly looked around, not knowing what to do. These 3 consecutive explosions stunned them. They had never encountered such a situation before, so they naturally did not know how to deal with it. What are you waiting for? Kill them. Gong Yimo's dignified voice fell. The garrison troops, who were originally unconvinced by a woman's orders, suddenly felt their blood boil. The enemy was now a mass of scattered sand. Wasn't this the best opportunity for them to fight? Therefore, the 8,000 people rushed out, raised their weapons, and slashed. The fire belt was like a natural moat. The explosion blasted a huge crater in the ground. Everyone hesitated as they watched the thousands of people who had rushed in earlier run around like headless flies. Then they faced the battle in a sorry state. How could the Empress Dowager watch her people get slaughtered? She ordered the troops to go forward and help the 3,000 people who had rushed into the belt of fire. Only then did Hai Qing regain his senses. Kill! Kill! The enemy doesn't have many weapons like this. Don't be afraid. That's right. If Gong Yimo had many such weapons, she could have started the war in Yuhua City. Why would she hide here? Therefore, many soldiers obeyed the order and continued to charge forward. Not only them, even Shang Mingxi was stunned. Gong Yimo only raised her bow again and condensed her internal energy. Light the fire. She asked Shang Mingxi to light the fuse, but Shang Mingxi didn't dare to. The match almost fell to the ground. Seeing this, Gong Yimo roared, Are you a man? Light the fire. Yes. Shang Mingxi subconsciously responded and quickly lit the fire. This extremely dangerous thing was so close to him, yet he still dared to light it. The flame ignited, and Gong Yimo shot an arrow, once again hitting the boundary of the fire zone. The sound of an explosion rang out, and another few dozen people fell to the ground. Although their injuries were not serious, the sudden pain was enough to throw their morale into chaos. It was as if that belt of fire was a warning, and anyone who crossed it would be killed without mercy. Many of them felt Gong Yimo's silent warning amidst the casualties of their comrades, and once again hesitated to move forward. Hai Qing was furious. Charge! She didn't have many of these weapons. Don't be afraid. But this time, no one listened to her. Perhaps she didn't have many of these weapons, but she shouldn't let them use their flesh and blood. The Empress Dowager also realized that something was wrong. The sudden change caused the people's morale to drop. If they didn't think of a way to put out the fire, they might really lose the battle in the chaos. Now the belt of fire began to spread in the direction of the Empress Dowager. Over at the Snow City, because a belt of fire had been dug, the fire would not spread over there. The Empress Dowager saw that her subordinates kept retreating when they saw the fire coming. So she quickly ordered people to dig a belt of fire to prevent the fire from spreading. This was the bad thing about autumn. Snow City was full of grasslands, and once the grass withered, it would be easy to burn, which was really annoying. There were continuous sounds of fighting over there. Gong Yimo ordered the archers to assist, but she nervously stared at the enemy. The belt of fire was about to go out, and without grass, the oil would not burn for long. Now the Empress Dowager was holding back for two reasons. First, to let her subordinates wake up from the shock. Second, the belt of fire was disturbing. Their clothes were on fire, which really affected the morale of the army. As for the thousands of people who rushed over, they could only pray for themselves. Seeing that the reinforcements had not arrived, the 3,000 enemies at the city gate panicked. Soon, more than half of their bodies were left behind. The Empress Dowager saw that the fire was dying down, and she was also very anxious. Everyone, don't be afraid. The enemy must not have many weapons. If you sacrifice yourselves here, I promise that after the victory, we will pay 3 times the compensation for those who died. Now that the arrow is on the bow, we have to release it. We can't just watch 3,000 of our comrades die. Now, we still have victory in our hands. Today is the day to make a contribution. What are you waiting for? Gong Yimo saw that the fire was dying down. The belt of fire that had spread for hundreds of meters was not enough to stop the enemy. She decisively gave the order. Retreat. Return to the city. At her order, the garrison, who had been in a killing frenzy, was a little reluctant. Out of 3,000 people, more than 2,000 had died. Why not kill them directly? However, they still respected Gong Yimo. So when she said to return to the city, they hesitated for a moment and retreated. The remaining 1,000 or so enemies did not dare to chase after them. They watched the gate of the Snow City close again. In the first round, they had lost 2,000 people for nothing. Shang Mingxi was a little excited. He kept asking her what she had tied to the arrowhead just now and why it was so powerful. Gong Yimo was a little impatient. Have you prepared what I asked you to prepare? Shang Mingxi nodded. It's close to the Mid-Autumn Festival. There are a lot of fireworks in the city. Very good. Gong Yimo ordered people to scatter all the fireworks and then tightly fill the big vats of wine. Not only did they contain the powder in the fireworks, she also asked people to put in some broken porcelain, stones, and other things. Finally, she put in a kind of black powder and mixed it well. Only the fuse was exposed, and then she sealed it. No one dared to ask her what she had put in, but looking at the dozens of sealed vats in front of them, they were a little scared. Shang Mingxi looked at the ground full of fireworks and firecrackers. Then, he thought about the powerful explosion of the tubular object. His heart flashed. Could it be that the legendary weapon in Gong Yimo's hands evolved from fireworks? He knew that fireworks could sometimes hurt people's hands, but Gong Yimo's weapon could blow up a big hole in the ground. It must have been made from more than just fireworks. Otherwise, the people of Daiyu State would have replicated it long ago. It would not have been only Gong Yimo who had it for so many years. Thinking of this, he sighed. In the past, he had heard that the princess of Daiyu State had a weapon that even the emperor coveted. He thought it was nonsense, but he did not expect it to be true. Before they could catch their breath, the Empress Dowager launched a second attack. Gong Yimo stood on the city wall calmly and watched the enemy rush over. She still did not react. This time, even Shang Mingxi was calm. Although he did not know what Gong Yimo was going to do, he trusted her blindly and knew that she must have her reasons for doing so. Chapter 481. Soon, the enemy reached the city gate. They all felt that everything was going too smoothly. They thought that the enemy must not have anything that could explode. That was why they were so quiet. Therefore, they were eager to fight again. They wanted to avenge themselves. At this time, they saw that there were 2 rows of ladders on the city wall. What was going on? Did the enemy think that they were too slow and invited them into the city? The Empress Dowager did not know what the enemy meant, so she did not move. Unexpectedly, a black thing appeared on the ladders. They carefully put the fire vat on the ladders and lit the fuse carefully. Finally, they let the fire vat roll down the ladders. The enemy was shocked. How could people run faster than a vat rolling? It quickly disappeared into the crowd and exploded with a loud bang. This time, it was even more painful than the previous explosion. Although it was not as lethal as before, there were many stone fragments in it, so it could kill people in a wide area. In an instant, screams and broken limbs were everywhere. It was like hell on earth. Many people felt sorry for it. However, Gong Imo's heart was as cold as iron. She raised her hand and lifted the second vat, then pushed it down. Another explosion. It not only killed people, but also disrupted the morale of the enemy. The smell of blood was carried by the wind. The governor of Snow City saw that Gong Imo ordered people to lift the vat again and was about to ignite it. He quickly stopped her. "Princess, is that enough? The enemy has lost their fighting spirit. There is no need to fight anymore." After all, the dead were Yuchi people. He could not bear to see them retreat. Gong Imo glanced at them and said in a low voice, "Just now, only about 100 people died and a few hundred were injured. The Empress Dowager will come back with such a small number of casualties. Get out of the way." She opened her eyes, and a murderous aura suddenly burst out from her body. She was used to death on the battlefield. Even if tens of thousands of people died here, she would not blink her eyes. The governor was scared away by her gaze. The princess from Dayu State was so scary. She was like a general who killed people without hesitation. She looked like a bloody general. At this time, the besiegers below hesitated. They didn't know how many of these exploding fire jars Gong Imo had in her hands. The stone fragments that flew out caused many to be implicated. The scene of flesh and blood flying, and the fear of the unknown, made them somewhat terrified. The Empress Dowager gritted her teeth so hard that they almost broke. The fact that these fire tanks exploded meant that Gong Imo must have made them on the spot. That is to say, the legendary item on her body was not difficult to make. Therefore, she was not sure how much the other party still had. Was she going to retreat? No, she couldn't swallow this humiliation. Attack. Anyone who takes the head of the Princess of Dayu State will be conferred the title of a third-grade general. Anyone who retreats will be killed without mercy. Under the Empress Dowager's almost iron-blooded coercion, Gong Imo also became ruthless and directly threw down 2 more fire vats. Perhaps the death and blood stimulated people's hearts. Perhaps it was because the Empress Dowager had really ordered Hai Qing to kill more than a dozen people who had retreated. The army did not retreat anymore. Instead, they attacked the city like crazy. In any case, as long as the city gate was breached, everything would be fine. Gong Imo saw that the other party was in a killing frenzy and asked Shang Mingxi in a low voice, "Is the street near the city gate empty?" Shang Mingxi nodded. "All the citizens have moved out. The street below is empty." Gong Imo nodded. "Open the city gate." Shang Mingxi hurriedly did as he was told. The enemy, who were in a killing frenzy, saw the city gate open and rushed in. However, as soon as they entered the city, they were splashed with cold water. Many citizens of Snow City splashed water on the attics on both sides of the street. They did not understand the purpose of this, but when they saw the people who rushed in being splashed with water, they were stunned. Then, when they saw the garrison in the city, their killing intent decreased sharply. They splashed water even more happily, hoping to be of some help. Close the city gate. After 3,000 people came in, Gong Imo ordered the city gate to be closed. Although there were people in the city who tried to stop them, they were no match for the 8,000 soldiers stationed in the city. Outside the city, Gong Imo threw down 2 more fire vats. Because of the close distance, many people died. Although they were frightened by the attack this time, they could not retreat because they would also die if they retreated. Gong Imo ordered Shang Mingxi to defend the city in the traditional way, and then order people to go downstairs and throw the bodies of the enemy down from the city gate. Many people who were attacking the city were thrown down from the ladders. However, when they took a closer look, they found that they were the bodies of their own people. Their eyes instantly turned red. When there were many bodies of the enemy piled up at the city gate, Gong Yimo directly broke the oil vats on the left and right of the city gate. The oil flowed down and contaminated the bodies of the enemy. Many people thought that Gong Yimo was going to do something big, so they began to step back and watch. However, Gong Yimo just casually threw a fire stick on the city gate. The fire burned instantly. The oil mixed with the bodies was ignited. Moreover, because the outlet of the oil was too big, the fire burned along the oil column and reached the oil vats. Not only did the 2 oil vats explode, but the 2 vats were also burned. The raging flames were like 2 fire towers. In the middle, there was a layer of fire made of corpses, so that the enemy had no space to advance. This burning the corpses of their own people. Many people saw that the fire was getting stronger and stronger, and they were a little confused. Bodies were still being thrown down from the city gate. These bodies were the people who had rushed into the city just now. It seemed that they were also in danger. This made the fear in their hearts grow even stronger. Once the oil of a person was ignited, it was very difficult to put it out. Therefore, the fire burned higher and higher, and mixed with the smell of burning meat. The sky was smoked black and red. Snow City looked like a city of fire from afar. Finally, some of the enemy soldiers could not help but kneel down. They did not kneel down to admit defeat, but because they were shocked by the scene in front of them. They were beaten black and blue by the volcano piled up by the bodies of their comrades. They were scared by Gong Yimo's strange methods. Their opponent surprised them again and again, and they were caught off guard every time. How could this war continue? What had been defeated was their willpower. Gong Yimo was finally a little tired. She ordered the city gate to be opened. When the stubborn people in the city saw the raging fire at the city gate, and the bodies of their comrades were all burned, and there were no reinforcements, no matter how strong their will to fight was. Gong Yimo took the opportunity to say, "Put down your weapons. Put down your weapons, and I'll spare your life." Almost as soon as she finished speaking, someone threw down his weapon. His weapon fell to the ground, and, as expected, the garrison troops did not continue to kill. This action caused everyone to throw down their weapons and become prisoners. Seeing that the enemy outside had retreated again, Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. She continued to pile up the bodies at the city gate. There were a total of thousands of bodies, and it was like a small mountain. When the Empress Dowager found out, she was furious. She ordered people to kill everyone who retreated. She forced the army to press on again, and they could not advance or retreat. Seeing that Gong Yimo had opened the city gate again, Hai Qing passed the Empress Dowager's order. "Don't be afraid. Knock the bodies away from the siege logs. We will kill our way in." Chapter 482. The soldiers had no choice but to obey the cold orders. However, when they used the siege logs to hit the pile of corpses in front of the city gates, their hands went limp. They had never been so shocked before. This was truly stepping through a mountain of corpses and a sea of fire. Everyone seemed to have been baptized by blood and tears. Gong Yimo was even more ruthless. She pushed the captives onto the city walls and made them shout in unison, "Those who enter the city, put down your weapons, and we will spare your lives. Those who enter the city, put down your weapons. We will spare your lives." The siege logs were knocked away from the burning pile of corpses. The first batch of people who rushed into the city looked around blankly. The first thing they saw was not the enemy, but their own people. They were all held hostage by the garrison. The garrison shouted loudly, "The princess is merciful and does not wish to be killed. If you put down your weapons, we will spare your lives. Otherwise, your companions will die in front of you." They habitually looked back, only to find that after the 1,000 people who rushed in, no one else came in. After a few explosions, they knew that the people behind them must have been stopped. On the other hand, they only had 1,000 people. There was no way they could win. Therefore, if they did not want to die, they could only surrender. When the first person put down his weapon, many others followed suit. However, in the process of taking in the captives, the garrison followed Gong Yimo's orders and tied them together in pairs. At this moment, one person suddenly resisted. It was not enough for the garrison to kill him directly. They also killed the people around him. The princess has ordered that we form pairs. If one person resists, we will kill both of them. This sentence instantly pulled everyone apart. Many of them were afraid of being implicated by the other party. In the end, after everyone was tied up, there was no second person who resisted. Shang Mingxi exclaimed in amazement. Gong Yimou's step-by-step psychological warfare was simply godly. No matter if it was the fire belt intimidation at the beginning, the mysterious weapons, the mountain of corpses and the sea of fire, or now the two-on-two groups, they were all suppressing and dividing the enemy. From the mental aspect, it gave the enemy a feeling of surprise and unpredictability. The series of attacks made the enemy think that they would win from the beginning. Later on, it turned into panic and then into fear. In the end, the thought that the enemy was too high to reach was born in his heart. It had only taken him a few hours to do all of this. In the end, Shang Mingxi was somewhat horrified to discover that after a few battles, less than 200 of the 8,000 men of the garrison had been killed or injured, while the enemy had lost nearly 10,000 men. What kind of gap was this? If it wasn't for the fact that they were in a hurry to prepare for the battle, and that many of the decisions were made at the last minute, and Gong Yimou had been given more time to prepare, the 60,000 people on the other side would have suffered a crushing defeat. Obviously, the Empress Dowager also realized this problem. She could not stop. If she gave Gong Yimou another night to prepare, she would definitely lose. Therefore, she could not retreat even if she was beaten back again and again. She ordered the army to attack. Anyone who breached the city gate would be promoted by one level, and those who killed 10 people would be promoted by another level. The more tired they were, the higher the rewards. In the evening, both sides were in a killing frenzy. Gong Yimou rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She felt a deep sense of exhaustion. She had not rested since they had escaped to this place yesterday. She had saved people from a sea of fire. If it had been any other time, she would have killed them long ago. She was never a person who planned strategies behind the scenes. She was a person who led her subordinates to charge and break through enemy lines and then change the troops at the last minute. However, her feet were in excruciating pain, and the wounds all over her body had not been treated. She could not recklessly charge down to kill people like before. How many fire vats are left? Shang Mingxi respectfully replied, 5 more. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she was full of energy again. Tell the rear to speed up the preparations. If the city gate is lost, immediately activate the second plan. Now prepare the trebuchets, rolling logs, and boiling water. We're going to fight with force. Shang Mingxi said, they still have nearly 50,000 people, and we only have 8,000. How can we defeat them with fewer people? Why don't we just retreat? No. A shrewd calculation flashed in Gong Yimou's eyes. At least 10,000 people have to be killed before we can retreat. Now, open the city gate. While creating obstacles for the following enemies and controlling the number of people who come in, we have to kill the enemy with all our strength. Send 200 people to throw corpses and pile up the mountain of corpses in front of the city gate again. When it is too difficult to control, put down the broken stone of the city gate to buy time. In short, we have to kill another 10,000 people before we can retreat. Otherwise, she could not guarantee that the follow-up arrangements would be smooth. Yes, Shang Mingxi hurriedly left. The city gate was wide open, and many people rushed in. On the city wall, stones and rolling logs were constantly falling down. In addition to the mountain of corpses that had been piled up again, the fire in front of the city gate was soaring to the sky. There were corpses everywhere. In the evening, the sky was still bright, but the billowing black smoke in the fire turned the sky into the color of burning clouds. The black smoke was rolling in the sky, and the fire was burning below. The smell of burnt corpses and flesh was everywhere, and the smell of blood and smoke filled the air. It was a scene of purgatory on earth. The people outside the city kept trying to break through the mountain of corpses and rush in, and inside the city, there were also sounds of fighting and killing. Seeing that the situation was out of control, Gong Yimo made a prompt decision to put down the broken stone of the city gate, and for the last time, kept the enemies outside the city gate. There were 5,000 or 6,000 people rushing in, and it was not easy to control them. However, the garrison still had the advantage in terms of numbers. But a broken stone could not stop the enemy. Once the broken stone was broken, the city gate could not be closed again. They could only retreat. Gong Yimo was actively preparing for the battle, and the people in the city were preparing the things that Gong Yimo wanted. She would not lose, no matter what. How could she lose? But now, winning or losing was one thing, and whether she could hold on was another thing. Seeing her pale face, Shang Mingxi hurriedly asked her if she needed to rest. Gong Yimo looked up, and her pupils shrank, and she directly stepped back. Then, she blocked the enemy's killing move with her sword. Now, it was a situation of life and death. The Empress Dowager had many masters under her command, but only Hai Qing could bypass all the obstacles and jump onto the city wall of Snow City. She gritted her teeth. She was worried that Gong Yimo would have another move, so she did not even care about her own safety and sent Hai Qing to kill Gong Yimo. As long as Gong Yimo was dead, Snow City would not be a threat. Hai Qing also suffered a lot of injuries in the battle, but most of them were minor injuries. Compared to Gong Yimo, he was nothing. Therefore, he pressed on step by step, vowing to behead Gong Yimo here. Gong Yimo was fighting with him, and, at the same time, she was paying attention to the situation on the battlefield. She was tired and in pain, and her inner strength was empty. She was not as strong as she wanted to be. When masters fought, the people on the city wall did not dare to rashly intervene. Gong Yimo also consciously protected them, so that they would not be distracted and concentrate on defending. Their ears were filled with the sound of killing. Every time Gong Yimo moved, blood would be left on the ground. Every step was no less than stepping on the edge of a blade. Chapter 483. At this moment, she heard the sound of rocks shattering under the city gates. While she was fighting with Hai Qing, she immediately ordered Shang Mingxi to throw down the last of the fire vats. She had to fight for the last bit of time. The flames of war in the city were not extinguished. The enemies outside must not be let in, but how could Hai Qing let him succeed? After he forced Gong Yimo back with his sword, he viciously stabbed at Shang Mingxi. Gong Yimo ignored the piercing pain in her foot and rushed over. She used the last of her inner strength to send Hai Qing flying. Hai Qing was hit and spat out blood. When he turned his head, he saw Gong Yimo already standing at the edge of the city wall. His eyes flashed fiercely, and he quickly threw the sword in his hand at her. Gong Yimo blocked it with her hand, but Hai Qing's sword contained inner strength. Although it was blocked, it still made her wobble, and she fell back uncontrollably. Oh no! Gong Yimo's eyes widened. If she was full of inner strength, she would not be afraid at all, or her foot would not be so painful, and she would not be knocked down by the sword. She kept falling. There were enemies and burning corpses below her. Was she going to die in the hands of these nameless soldiers? Gong Yimo! Shang Mingxi could no longer suppress his fear and shouted from the top of the city wall. Everyone on the city wall stopped attacking and shouted nervously, "Princess!" Gong Yimo looked at their faces getting farther and farther away. Suddenly, she closed her eyes. At that moment, in addition to her exhaustion, countless images flashed through her mind. She was originally not afraid of death. In this life, she had been picked up, so she had profited. But at the moment of her death, she suddenly felt a little reluctant. It was too sudden. She had not even said goodbye to Gong Dai and told him the secret that she was not his blood relative. She suddenly doubted herself. In this life, she had done so many things, helped so many people, received so many praises, so many admirers. Was she satisfied? Why did she feel a little regretful when she was about to die? Regret. The flashing images in her mind finally stopped. It was the scene of her and Gong Dai eating a chicken drumstick when they were young. If only I could see him one last time before I die. But in the next second, she didn't fall into a sea of corpses, nor did she fall into the enemy's swords. Instead, she fell into a clean embrace. On his body, there was a familiar fragrance. By her ears, she could hear his heartbeat that was almost jumping out of his chest. When she opened her eyes, he had already landed on the ground with her in his arms. The strong inner force directly pushed away all the obstacles under his feet. The enemy could not get close to Gong Dai at all, and he held Gong Yimo tightly in his arms. He was so scared that he could not speak for a long time. Was this a dream? Gong Yimo blinked and blinked again. She watched as the other party's face turned darker and darker. His handsome features were almost contorted. Gong Yimo finally confirmed that she was not dreaming. Gong Dai was very angry. He was going to lose his temper. A bone-piercing chill ran down her spine. She was so scared that she quickly put her arms around Gong Dai's neck and said in fear, "Thank goodness you came. I knew you would come to save me." She was really scared, but it was not because of the fear of escaping death. It was because Gong Dai's face was too scary. She had never seen him so scary before. The flames brewing in his eyes were about to swallow her whole. So she was terrified and acted coquettishly. What did he mean by knowing that he would come back? She had prepared so many follow-up plans when she was preparing for the battle, but none of them involved him. Gong Dai was naturally aware of this and wanted to lose his temper, but he was coaxed by her words. He opened his mouth, but in the end, he still hugged her tightly. In the end, he did not have the heart to scold her at this time. She was really too bold. Only the heavens knew how scared he was when he saw her fall from the city wall and saw the sea of corpses below, as well as the swords raised by the enemy. If he was a step late, no, he could not be late. He could not lose her. He cannot. Gong Dai hugged her tightly and smelled the scent of blood on her body. His eyes turned red, and he squeezed out a sentence from between his teeth. "I'll deal with you later." Gong Yimo's body trembled imperceptibly, and she pretended to be dead in his arms. More and more enemies surrounded Gong Dai because the people on the city wall had stopped attacking, afraid that the princess would be hurt. But even so, Gong Dai's internal energy was too strong. No one could get close to him. At this time, the sound of fighting could be heard again. Lo Chi led a group of people to Gong Dai's side. When he saw that the princess was not dead, he experienced the whole process of dying and coming back to life. Gong Dai looked at the black mass of people behind him, and his body was filled with hostility. Kill them all. The enemy saw that the people who suddenly appeared only brought about 200 people, and these 200 people obviously came from the swamp. Although they were blocking in front of Princess Diyu, wasn't it too whimsical to think that these 200 people could kill them all? If they killed the princess of Diyu State, they would be promoted to rank 3. So the enemies rubbed their palms and rushed over directly. However, Gong Yimo knew what the tubes on the backs of Lo Chi and the others were. She tugged at Gong Dai's sleeve and whispered to him, "Just beat them back." After all, she wanted to kill them all before because they were evenly matched. But now, with Gong Ju's arrival, her combat effectiveness had immediately reversed. She was not worried, so it was fine as long as they were beaten back. Gong Dai did not speak. He was filled with anger at this time, but he could not bear to hurt the royal sister. Only by killing these people could his anger be slightly appeased. Gong Yimo saw that the fighting strength of these 200 people was very powerful. They formed a line of defense, and the enemy was forced to retreat. No one could break through the line of defense. So Gong Dai hugged her. There was no one around except for corpses. This was not the end. These few hundred people forced the enemies to retreat. 50 of them began to retreat, while the rest continued to block the front. The 50 retreating people took out something the size of a bamboo joint from their backs, lit the fuse, and threw it out. Even the distance of the throw was the same. An earth-shattering explosion sounded. With this, a vacuum was created in the midst of the surging enemies. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. In an instant, thousands of people died. Cries of agony filled the sky. This was not a small fight like Gong Yimou's. 50 bombs exploded at the same time, and the sound was earth-shattering. The scene of a meat grinder instantly made the enemies lose their morale. They wanted nothing more than to kneel and beg for mercy. At this moment, they felt that this person who suddenly appeared was a demon. Their bodies of flesh and blood simply couldn't win. Gong Dai. Gong Yimou frowned nervously. My legs hurt. My head hurts. Everywhere hurts. Let's go to sleep after we beat them back, okay? It was shameful to act cute, but who cared about that now? If this went on, there would be corpses everywhere. Chapter 484. Amidst the flames of war, Gong Ju's black clothes were covered in thick ink. At this time, he was completely deaf to other sounds. His dark gray eyebrows raised slightly, and his pair of black and white eyes stared unblinkingly at Gong Yimou beside him. The mountain of corpses and the sea of fire had yet to be extinguished, and the smoke of gunpowder rose again. He hugged Gong Yimou amidst the flames of war. Her black hair and black clothes fluttered in the wind. She was a rare treasure in his arms. The enemy troops retreated quickly, but Gong Dai said to kill them all. Hence, Lo Chi and the rest pursued the enemy. The battle turned into a one-sided situation. If someone said that a few hundred people could defeat tens of thousands of people, that person would be crazy. But the reality was like this. The army retreated like a black tide. Many of them tripped over the corpses on the ground, but they got up and continued running. Everyone's face was filled with fear. It was as if there were ghosts chasing after them. The 200 people were like ghosts. Their hands reached out to their backs again. As long as they ignited the explosives, a large number of the people in front would fall. Gong Yimou looked at the corpses on the ground and heard the mournful cries. Gong Dai remained indifferent. It was as if he was determined to make those people pay the price. She panicked and hugged his neck. She leaned forward and kissed his thin lips. Gong Dai was shocked. He seemed to have just woken up. He really saved her. She was still alive. The two kissed amidst the flames of war. Gong Yimou wanted to pull away from him immediately, but Gong Dai wrapped himself around her and kissed her deeply as if there was no one around them. The fire and corpses around them represented passion and incompleteness. The woman in his arms represented eternity. The people on the city wall were stunned. They did not know what to do. The explosions and cries in the distance could not disturb the two people. Their figures were so entwined in the afterglow of the setting sun and the flames. It was so difficult to separate them. Gong Yimou was about to suffocate. Furthermore, the situation was so urgent. How could she be in the mood to kiss? This was just a bait. She said seriously, "How about we retreat? Let's go into the city and kiss again?" As soon as she finished speaking, her old face flushed red. She felt that she had never been so embarrassed in her entire life. Gong Dai finally revealed an undetectable smile. He raised his hand, and Lo Chi received the order and quickly retreated. The entire movement was neat and uniform. In just a moment, those aggressive people had already disappeared. A war from a one-sided attack at the beginning to a one-sided suppression at the end, it was simply a legend. But after this battle, Gong Dai's name would spread throughout the 4 countries. Unlike his previous gentle infiltration, his appearance this time shocked the world with his absolute martial strength. Seeing that Gong Dai had finally stopped, Gong Yimou let out a long sigh of relief. At this time, she heard a soft cry. It turned out that Hai Qing had noticed that the situation was not right, so she grabbed Shang Mingxi and wanted to run. Gong Yimou panicked and said to Gong Dai, "We can't let him take Shang Mingxi away." Shang Mingxi? Gong Dai raised his eyebrows in displeasure. His unwillingness was written all over his face. Gong Yimou was about to vomit blood. She grabbed Gong Dai's collar and said in a very small voice, "He is the key to whether I can quickly solve the problem of Ichi. Don't you want me to go back as soon as possible?" Gong Dai looked at her and refused to move. Gong Yimou decided to go all out. She gritted her teeth and said, "I don't like him. I don't like him at all. Hurry and save him." Even though she had lowered her voice, Lo Chi and the rest could still hear her clearly. They chuckled softly, not daring to speak too loudly for fear of embarrassing the princess. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo flew into a rage out of humiliation. Lo Chi. Gong Dai finally spoke. "Your subordinate is here. Save him." "Yes, Your Highness." Lo Chi hurried over with 2 men. Since the prince had ordered them to save him, they had to bring him back unscathed. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief and fell into Gong Dai's arms. She was exhausted. The governor of Snow City, who was on the city wall, was stunned. Just now, they had been shouting and yelling with the army as if the end of the world had come. But as soon as this man appeared, he had easily resolved the catastrophe. Who was he? Why had he never seen him before? When did such a powerful person appear in the 4 countries? Before he could think about it, Gong Dai hugged her for a while and found that her body was covered with bruises. Her eyes were full of anger, as if she wanted to blow up Snow City to vent her anger. "Xiaoqi, open the city gate." "Yes, Your Highness." Luo Xiaoqi had been eager to show off in front of the princess. At this time, a piece of broken stone fell from Snow City. Just now, the Empress Dowager's people had been trying to break the stone for a long time, but they could not break it. However, Gong Dai's people were not ordinary. Luo Xiaoqi was the most talented person in terms of blasting. He found the right angle and buried the bomb. With a loud bang, the people on the city wall were scared out of their wits. They were afraid that they would be smashed into pieces like the flesh and blood that flew up just now. After the loud bang, there was another loud bang. The broken stone that they had failed to break with the cost of countless people's lives just now collapsed. Everyone stepped back. Gong Dai waved his hand, and all the debris and dust were blown away by his internal strength, so that Gong Yimo would not be contaminated. When the broken stone fell, the people inside were not distracted. They even thought that the Empress Dowager's people had broken in. Luo Xiaoqi saw this and quickly stepped forward. He gathered his chi in his dantian and shouted, "People inside, listen up. Empress Dowager Yu Qi has been defeated. Those who lay down their weapons will be spared." What? The Empress Dowager was defeated? How was this possible? But when they looked back, there were fire and corpses outside the city wall. It was really quiet. Could it be that the Empress Dowager was really defeated? At this time, the governor of Xueqing hurriedly ran down the stairs and followed Gongju. "My lord." He didn't know how to address Gong Dai, so he compromised and called him lord. Gong Dai frowned slightly. "Keep your voice down." The governor was stunned. When he came to himself, he found that the princess in his arms had fallen asleep. The people in the city were still shouting and killing. How could she fall asleep so peacefully? "I want a quiet place for her to rest." The governor nodded repeatedly. "Go to the governor's mansion. No one will disturb you." But he regretted it after saying that. These people were still fighting. How could they pass through the tens of thousands of people who were crazy about killing? Gong Dai also saw that Luo Xiaoqi's roar had no effect on these crazy people. He frowned and a cold light flashed in his eyes. If these people didn't know what was good for them, he didn't mind slaughtering the whole city to vent his anger. The next second, Gong Dai's special and dignified voice was clearly heard by everyone who was crazy about killing. His tone was cold, but he didn't hide his killing intent. After 3 breaths, those who still have weapons in their hands will be killed without mercy. Chapter 485. Gong Dai's voice was infused with his inner force, causing people's brains to ache. There was a moment of hesitation in the scene of tens of thousands of people fighting each other. However, Gong Dai had already walked in with Gong Yimo in his arms. The prefect gritted his teeth and followed behind with his men. Gong Dai's men walked at the back with an imposing aura. Perhaps it was because Gong Dai's murderous aura was too strong, or perhaps it was because his words did not distinguish between friend and foe. These people were hesitant when they fought. When Gong Dai walked past, if there were still people who did not stop, Gong Dai did not even need to make a move. Those people were killed by the men in black behind Gong Dai without distinguishing friend from foe. Their heads were chopped off and blood spurted high into the air. Everyone was shocked by this team of close to 200 people. Murderous aura. Although they were few in number, their eyes were bright and they were dressed in black. They were like a black sword that pierced into the chaotic battle of tens of thousands of people. Their footsteps were uniform, and it was so silent that it made people feel terrified. Finally, before Gong Dai approached, they subconsciously moved away and opened up a wide path for him. The people on both sides held weapons in their hands and felt uneasy. What if they were misunderstood as a sneak attack? Therefore, even if they were unwilling before Gong Dai approached, they all put down their weapons and lowered their heads, not daring to look at him. This created a strange phenomenon. Wherever Gong Dai went, those people would move away. Although they hesitated, they would tremble and put down their weapons. Once they put down their weapons, it affected the others. More and more people put down their weapons. Moreover, each of them suppressed their heavy breathing, afraid of disturbing this team. The Imperial Army and local garrison troops that the Empress Dowager had brought with her were covered in dust and dirt. Their bodies were stained with blood, not knowing whether it was their own or others. However, the people that Gong Dai brought with him were different. Their black clothes were neat and tidy, and they were all clean and energetic. They looked straight ahead and followed behind Gong Dai. The murderous aura on their bodies accumulated together, and their fighting spirit soared to the sky. Even if there were only 200 of them, no one dared to offend them. The governor followed behind Gong Ju, his entire body stunned. He could feel that the men in black behind him were staring at him with cold eyes. He didn't dare to look back. The hair on his back stood on end, and he could only bury his head in front of him and stare at Gong Ju's slightly raised clothes. The leader's clothes were the same as his subordinates. They were all black. The only difference was that there was a flood dragon embroidered with golden embroidery on his clothes. The flood dragon was ferocious and seemed as if it was about to come alive. He was so scared that he did not even dare to look at the leader's clothes. Clang, 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 clang. Clang, 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 clang. He clangs, clang, clang, clangs, cloth people of great. Of clangs of s. The entire snow city fell silent in an instant. The prefect and the others were in disbelief. Who the hell is this? Why is his aura so strong? Why is his murderous aura so strong that it can freeze the entire city in an instant? This is really unheard of. Just a glimpse of him is enough to shock them for the rest of their lives. Just like that, Gong Dai walked through the congested road. Nobody moved after they had put down their weapons. The prefect hurriedly left one of his assistants behind to clean up the mess while he followed Gong Dai closely. He was afraid that if Gong Dai was displeased, he would take his anger out on Snow City. Gong Dai did not care about external things. At this moment, all of his attention was occupied by the troublesome girl in his arms. He could not spare any of his attention to anyone else. At this moment, he saw that she was moving a little uncomfortably because of the armor she was wearing. In the next second, Gong Dai stopped walking and looked coldly at the prefect, who was over 50 years old. The prefect's body trembled, and he was on the verge of tears. He stopped himself from wiping his sweat and bent down to make a small gesture. "Sir, it's not far away. It's just ahead. It's just ahead." Luo Xiaoqi was the best at guessing the prince's intentions. He took a big step forward and carried the prefect, whose legs were trembling on his shoulders. "Show me the way." The prefect was so slow. Didn't he see that the prince was already very displeased? The prefect exclaimed softly. However, under Gong Dai's stare, he did not dare to say that it would be inappropriate to put him down. He only pointed in a direction with trembling hands. Luo Xiaoqi carried him quickly and left. The procession sped up immediately. It was not until the procession had completely disappeared at the end of the street that the more than 10,000 people who had put down their weapons began to gasp for breath. Gong Dai did not do anything, but they felt as if they had just survived a disaster. Wasn't that the same as surviving a disaster? The prefect's deputy recalled how he had seen this terrifying procession at the city gate. He had seen how they had easily defeated the enemy. He had also seen how they had killed thousands of people in one move and caused the entire battlefield to wail like ghosts and howl like wolves. He was really afraid just now. He was afraid that these people would lose their minds and continue to fight despite his warning. At that time, it would not be impossible for that important person to slaughter these 10,000 people in a fit of anger. The Empress Dowager could not believe her eyes. During the series of explosions just now, she was at the back of the procession. She was clearly safe, but she had personally experienced what a disaster was like. She sat motionless in the carriage because she was scared silly. She could not move her limbs. She could only watch as her people retreated in defeat. They had lost all their dignity. Finally, under the last rays of the setting sun, he saw Hai Qing, who had lost an arm. Blood was flowing nonstop. It was useless to seal his acupoints. Hai Qing was seriously injured and was somewhat delirious. However, when he saw the Empress Dowager, he held his breath and ran over. The Empress Dowager quickly ordered people to treat his injuries. Then, she asked him in a trembling voice what had happened. It was so far away and the light was gradually fading. Although she had felt the earth-shattering, murderous intent, she did not know who had done it. Could it be Gong Yimo? It was impossible. She couldn't have done this in such a short time. Hai Qing's remaining hand grabbed the Empress Dowager's wrist tightly. His eyes were bloodshot. Obviously, the previous scene had caused quite a shock to him. Monster! No! Killing God! His chest was heaving up and down violently. He seemed to have thought of the previous scene of destruction. His pupils shrank, and his whole body was filled with fear. It was a group of men in black. They came from the swamp. They came and slaughtered our army. They were Gong Yimo's people. They were very powerful. He paused and thought of that godlike man. His whole body trembled. The man in the lead is very scary, very scary. After saying that, he fainted. Obviously, he was physically and mentally injured. The Empress Dowager saw that the morale of the army had been shattered. She knew that she could not wait any longer. Although she felt extremely humiliated, none of this could be compared to her life. Chapter 486. Therefore, the Empress Dowager made a prompt decision to retreat back to Yuhua City. When the army had arrived, they had come with a ferocious aura. There were 60,000 of them, but when they left, it was as if they were running for their lives. In just one encounter, Gongju harvested the lives of 10,000 people. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was the god of death. When he placed Gong Yimo on the bed, she felt very comfortable and continued to sleep. Gong Dai's eyes were filled with gentleness, and then he began to take off her armor. But the more he took off, the colder his eyes became. Her clothes were bleeding to varying degrees, especially her feet, which were almost soaked in blood. Seeing this, his killing intent surged. He wanted to capture the 40,000 people who had escaped and kill them all. The door was suddenly opened, and Gong Dai appeared with a murderous look on his face. Everyone present was stunned. Lo Chi and the others were on standby. Even the governor did not care about the chaos in Snow City. He personally brought a doctor to guard here, but Gong Dai's expression was not good, and they did not dare to say anything. Gong Dai naturally did not trust the people of Snow City. He ordered Lo Chi, "Go and bring Lu Ranxin here." At first, there were 300 people in their team, but Gong Dai felt uneasy, especially after knowing that the royal sister had retreated to Snow City. He even brought 200 elites to take a shortcut through the dangerous swamp and cut in from the side of the battlefield. Fortunately, they arrived in time, but there were more than 100 people left, and some of them did not know martial arts, including the miracle Dr. Lu Ranxin. Therefore, Gong Dai ordered Lo Chi to bring Lu Ranxin here. Obviously, there was something urgent. Lo Chi did not dare to delay. "Yes, Your Highness. Your Highness, just now." The answer was the sound of the door closing. Lo Chi was a little embarrassed. He had not finished speaking but he had already brought back the person that the princess wanted to save. The governor was completely ignored and felt a little awkward. Lochi thought for a moment and said to him, "Sir, don't worry. As long as the princess is fine, Snow City will be fine." Her words made the governor even more afraid. He could see how tired the princess was at that time, especially when she left bloody footprints on the ground with every step she took. Did that count as something bad or not? "Please tell my lord that I've brought the best doctor in the city." Lochi saw that the prefect was still pale despite his age, so he kindly pointed out a way for him. "If you have time to stay here, why don't you take care of the funeral in the city? If His Highness comes back to his senses and finds that Snow City is still in chaos, he will not be happy." After saying that, he used all his strength to display his qigong. There was no other way. The princess was injured. It was more serious than the prince himself. He had no choice but to be on guard and use his fastest speed to pick up the person. The prefect hesitated at the door. There were 2 men in black guarding the door, and they looked unfriendly, so he did not dare to go in. He thought to himself, "It's better to go and clean up the mess. What if I offend His Highness by standing here?" In the room, Gong Dai really did not have the energy to pay attention to them, because after he took off all his armor, he was ready to take off her blood-stained undergarments. He took off her clothes layer by layer, leaving no room for warmth, because Gong Dai's eyes were full of murderous intent, and it was very scary. The 2 people standing outside the room felt the unusual silence, and both of them were a little nervous. There were many wounds on her body. Most of them were burns, and some of them were bleeding. She looked very hideous, but none of these could compare to her feet. Her feet were almost crippled. Gong Dai looked at the pair of stockings and did not know how to take them off. Gong Yimo had been very quiet, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. Occasionally, when the fabric of her clothes was peeled off, her body would suddenly tremble, and she would let out 2 soft moans, making Gong Dai's movements even gentler. However, he really did not know where to start with her feet. But if he covered them like this, it would be even worse for the wounds, so he bit his lower lip, endured the pain, and removed the stockings. Walking out of the sea of fire looked easy. Even if she used water to pave the way, the heat of the water vapor was not inferior to the fire, so her feet were injured to such an extent. It was really difficult for her to walk from Yuhua City to Snow City. Every step was a heart-wrenching pain. Gong Dai used a pair of scissors and carefully cut open the stockings. Sure enough, the flesh was already connected to the stockings. He carefully sprinkled the top-quality wound medicine, then cut the stockings bit by bit and tore them off bit by bit. The whole process was like walking on thin ice, causing Gong Dai's forehead to be covered in cold sweat, afraid that he would hurt her. It would definitely hurt, but Gong Yimo was really too tired. Her inner strength was exhausted. She was injured. She was exhausted. She was preparing for war. She was exhausted from running for her life, and she did not sleep for an entire night. All of these made her numb to the pain. Even if it was very painful, she could still go back to sleep after a few moans. Seeing this, Gong Dai's heart ached, and he wanted to beat her up, but how could he bear to do it? His royal sister was always like this, doing everything with all her might, not thinking about whether it would hurt or if she could do it. She must have thought that she could do it, so she pushed herself to her limits. What he did not know was that this was a habit that Gong Yimo had developed in her previous life, because on the battlefield, no one could save you. Only you could save yourself. So she had never relied on anyone. There was only victory or death on the battlefield. She would definitely choose to win, although she would still die in the end. Gong Yimo thought of something painful. She was a little restless in her dreams. Her little brows were furrowed, not knowing if it was because of the pain or because of the nightmare. Gong Dai finally removed all the fragments from her feet. Looking at the pair of bloody and ghastly feet, Gong Dai did not dare to apply any more medicine. It was better to wait for Lu Ranxin to come and treat her. He only carefully wiped her feet with water, wiping away the excess bloodstains. After doing all this, he was already drenched. Damn it, he must cut the person who harmed Royal Sister into 8 pieces. Roast them in the fire. Only then could he dispel the hatred in his heart. Lu Ranxin arrived very quickly. Lo Chi was in a rush and had no choice but to offend him, so he was carried all the way here. When he landed on the ground, he was so angry that his beard stood up. Divine Dr. Lu, this is a serious matter. If anything happens to the princess, you know His Highness' temper. The princess is his reverse scale. Thinking of Gong Dai's methods, Lu Ranxin temporarily suppressed his anger, but still muttered, "This old man wants to see what kind of saint he is." He had never met Gong Yimo before, but in his thoughts, this kind of woman who was always in the limelight had a bad character. Although there were more and more people praising her virtues, but in Lu Ranxin's heart, he felt that she should go back home to help her husband and children. The room door was opened and the smell of blood rushed in, making Lu Ranxin frown slightly. He originally thought that the princess was just lightly injured, and it was because His Highness was overly concerned, so he had to help her. But from the looks of it, her injuries seem to be rather serious. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.